what is kind of hard-earned over all the years, contrary to some people who say, oh, you're just a natural.
10 seconds.
Have you asked me how hard I've worked? Can we have that conversation?
5 seconds.
Before you assert that what I'm exhibiting is just something that comes naturally? My first interview on Jon Stewart, I saw he was one of these guests here. My first interview on The Daily Show. I studied how many seconds he let his guests speak before he interrupted them. And I got the rhythm of that. And I said, if I ever go on his show, I will parcel my cosmic knowledge in these bits so that I will complete a thought before he interrupts. And that way, when he interrupts, there's a complete thought, and then we can laugh at whatever joke he makes. So that there's a stable trajectory through that interview. I did this, okay?
That's good. Yeah,
okay.
That's a good tip.
Wait. One more. Okay. So first time I'm on the evening news. It was 1995. The first exoplanet had been discovered, a planet orbiting another star. And that was banner headlines. So they sent a camera to the Hayden Planetarium. It was my first year as director. In fact, at the time I was interim director. And they didn't know me from it. What?
Was this before or after you banished Pluto? I just want.
Oh, yeah.
Pluto.
Jesus.
Sorry, I had to mention
Pluto. Yeah, the Pluto incident came later. Okay. So nobody knows me from anything. The NBC sent the camera just to interview the director, who was me. So I give them my best professorial. It's 3 in the afternoon. This is for the evening news. So they say, how did we discover this? I give my best professorial reply. I said it's the Doppler shift, and planets don't orbit their host stars. The planet and the host star orbit a common center of gravity, which is not centered in the center of the star. So while the planet does this, which you can't see, it's too dim, the host star does this. It kind of jiggles like that. So I'm describing all of this, and I went home, called everybody, Mom, Pop, go watch on the evening news. I go home, and I watched the evening news, and all they had of me was me doing this. So I said, oh, they don't want my professorial reply. They want a sound bite. And I said, I will never be sound bitten again. I'm going to hand them a sound bite that will fit in their time slot. So I went home and practiced. You look in the mirror, you get someone that's like, bark out anything in the universe, idea, place, thing. Saturn's rings, black holes, Big Bang. You just say it, and I practice 3-sentence replies, ideally. It's got to be interesting, informative, and maybe make you smile enough to want to tell someone else the anatomy of a soundbite. And so I practiced that. So then next time they came, I just handed them sound bites. And they didn't have to edit a thing. And they kept coming back, I came to learn. And so I'm tasked with serving a curiosity. The least I could do is invest some of my brain power and emotional power to do as good a job as I can. And today, I've learned even more, especially through my radio show, Star Talk, which jumped species and is now on television. First ever science-based talk show on television, ever. It wasn't on purpose, it just landed that way. So I figured this out. I mean, I figured out before I looked back and said, oh, was that what I was doing? You come to the table with a pop culture scaffold. You know who Beyonce is, typically. You know who the president is. You know what football is. You know, there are things you just know.
You know she's having twins, and you name them
on Twitter. I try to name Beyonce's twins, but I'll get to that in a minute.
Astronomical.
So what I found was everyone comes with this scaffold. And you are an expert in that scaffold. That's the definition of pop culture, okay? Now, I realized that since science is everywhere, I can attach the science that I'm trying to teach to that scaffold. And if you do that, you're already halfway there. And but that takes a huge investment of my time learning the pop culture that would be the common denominator of everyone. So I got to watch the #1 show, got to watch a few episodes of Game of Thrones, got to see the Super Bowl, all the things that define America. I got to sort of get in the middle of that. And that helps, and that arms my utility belt in every
At last, Jax.
occasion
The final
where
battle
I want to convey meaning in scientific concepts and ideas. And if I have a scientific concept and idea that is fundamentally mind-blowing without any assistance, then I just put it out there because it'll blow your mind without any reference to pop culture at all. And that's kind of the combination of things that are in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, those were. I didn't actually think you would give tip. That was a really good answer. Also, I have to think you gave tip, which reminds me to say, which I forgot to say, that our Facebook Live audience, you are welcome to submit questions. We will be taking questions from this audience.
This is live?
And yes.
Oh, okay.
Wow. Hundreds of thousands of people are watching us. And we will take a few questions starting in about 15 minutes. So, yeah, so the book, so the book. So you do all these different forms of science communication. You seem to tweet. Do you have like a staff of people who supply your tweets? Or do you,
So,
I mean,
okay, so that is simultaneously a compliment and an insult, right? To come up to me and say, are you the author of all those tweets on your
tweet a
Twitter?
lot.
Well, I tweet once or twice a day. That's not all that, not compared to the President of the United States. I have a fraction of his tweets. So a literal fraction is like a fifth of his tweets I'm tweeting. So,
Yes. Resistance success.
So, you know, I don't, forgive my bias, but I don't think of ardent New York Times readers as active tweeters. You know, I just don't connect the two. We have a few here. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. See what I'm saying? See? Okay. Why do I tweet at all? Well, you didn't ask that.
No,
but,
I was just
okay.
saying. I was saying. Okay, you have the Star Talk. You tweet. You are on Future Worm. You are.
Oh, that's a kid's
Animation.
animated cartoon.
Right, you-
I was a character in that briefly.
You also give science talks. So I'm just so why
Yes.
why write this book? Like, what were you hoping to accomplish in this form of science communication?
Like in a book.
Yeah, why a book?
You look at this like, this is weird. He wrote a book. So I have to explain myself leading up to that.
Yes.
So I have a cameo in the movie Zoolander 2, okay? I also had a cameo in the movie Batman versus Superman. I also have a cameo in the movie Ice Age 5. Yes, there were 4 previous Ice Age movies, okay? This is with the animated Ice Age mammal, the former herd that was just trying to survive. Why? I did that because I'm soft when it comes to an artist who wants to add legitimate science to their craft. When they reach for science to participate as one of the forces operating on their artistic muse. So if they reach for, otherwise if they don't reach for me, I don't know who they're reaching for, and I don't want them to just make it up. So I'm there when they call. And so now with the book,
Must be.
I realized there are people who, a headline might have just wafted by about the universe. And you got these fragments, and we're all busy, we all have full lives, you got kids, a job, school, and so I thought to myself, something needs to be out there that could put a coherent umbrella over all those bits and pieces that you words like exoplanet, like dark matter, dark energy, a multiverse, colliding black holes. You've heard these terms, and you've read fragments of those stories. You didn't read the whole story because you're in a hurry, but you know these words. And I thought to myself, I need an offering for the people who are curious, who retain some fragments of information, but are desperate to consummate their relationship with the universe. And so this is a conduit for that effort. And I try to blow your mind with some cosmic phenomenon every 20 pages or so. That's my-
And you say in the introduction that you think there's an appetite for it because you think that people are really more open now to science and
than ever before. And I I had like maybe this much to do with it. I mean, consider one of the great movies of the last couple of years was The Martian, which had so much scientific accuracy, and it had first-run actors, marquee director Ridley Scott, marquee budget, and this is science stories being told. Not only that, you have these biopics lately with The Theory of Everything, the Stephen Hawking story. What's the other one? Imitation Game with...
The self rose.
Thank you, Alan Turing.
Second soul.
And so, but what it means is the gatekeepers of the storytelling have recognized that scientists are people too, and maybe we have stories you can talk about, and not just the troubled author or the troubled military general or whatever troubled head of state. They're interesting stories because scientists are humans with almost the full range of human dynamic that goes on with anybody else, almost. And so, and you go back to the 1950s, all the sci-fi movies, there were scientists in them, but they were just behind a slab or something with a lab coat.
Yes.
They say, Professor, is the asteroid going to hit? And they say, no, or yes, whatever. Then they're done, and then they move on to other characters who you care about more. So the stereotype has been, this is not someone who you want to base an entire film on. So I think we've come out of that, and access to science is greater than ever before, and in important ways, especially because artists are reaching for it. And that's how I know it has entered pop culture.
But here's my question about that. So since the election, we've talked a lot about the partisan divide, that there's clearly this divide in our country. And we have scientists who are really science being ignored, and what is the fate of empirical thought? So, I mean, is that
They're nothing alike.
is there like one part of the population that's really into science now, and one part that isn't? And what can we do about that?
Yeah, I have a cop-out answer to that, and it's the answer anybody gives. And this is not original nor illuminating, but I'm going to give it anyway. So while I think access to science is greater than ever before, and the number of people who think about science as a fundamental part of their daily lives is greater than ever before, and I think the demographic that knows it best are those who are basically 30 and under, certainly 25 and older. That community has only ever known a world with smartphones. And I think to a person, they know that smartphone requires brilliant programming, engineering, space with GPS, and it is the founding principle of their lives, social life, their capacity to interact, to learn, all of this. So if you remember from the voting patterns, that demographic voted differently from everybody else. And so I'm going to say the rare thing that no adult has ever said in their lives. I can't wait till the next generation takes over. All right? There's a never before uttered comment in the history of the world. I can't wait till they take over because they're more scientifically literate than from what I've seen, than any generation that's come before, and they'll fix everything.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, while we wait for them to grow up,
Okay,
on
hurry up
Earth,
and grow
while
up.
we wait for those
You're
Earthlings,
9.
I want to.
Hurry up. Okay.
I want to talk about. So the Earthlings will grow up, and we can talk about other exoplanets, right?
Yes.
Okay.
In
So-
fact, anyone born after 1995, when the first exoplanet was discovered, I want to knight them Generation Exoplanets. That's what I want to do. Yeah?
So we have actually a very short video clip the Times produced about exoplanets that I think we're going to show now.
Okay.
So we'll show it. It'll be up there and down here. Or we can just talk about them if it's not going to come on. Here it is.
Seeking.
The discovery gives us a hint that finding a second Earth is not just a matter of if, but when.
I'm getting a second wind.
The self-rose. So it must be.
So coincidentally, our first Facebook Live question has just come from Katrina Davis, who asks, "How long do you think it will be until humans move to another planet?" I mean, is that happening? Has this changed your mind about the possibility of humans going somewhere else?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, we're not going anywhere. Does it look
Yeah.
like we're all ready to move off of Earth? Do you have any evidence of this at all?
Things have gotten kind of bad here.
Do you?
Okay.
No, I'm just being sincere. Okay, no. Unless there's some military reason to colonize Mars, or we find oil on Mars, because its atmosphere is already 100% CO2. So who cares if you add some more there? I'm a sort of skeptic in that regard. I don't see it happening. By the way, I have to be clear. If I can back up a few moments, the issue about whether the New York Times refers to these skeptic deniers, these climate deniers as skeptics or deniers, is it's more important than I think anyone on the editorial staff recognize, because a skeptic looks at all the evidence and finds out where the scientific consensus emerges, and then they adopt the scientific consensus.
Yes.
That's what a skeptic does. A skeptic is doubtful only when there's not enough evidence to convince them. And they know how to be convinced by evidence. You get convinced and then you move on. Once you see the emergent evidence and you are still denying it, you're a denier of a scientific truth. I want to just make that.
Point taken.
Okay. On live Facebook. Okay.
So
If you say the Earth is flat, you are an Earth sphere denier, okay? You're not an Earth skeptic. Just let's be clear. If you gain weight this week, you can't blame the force of gravity and try to repeal the law of gravity for that having happened. Sorry, go on, pick up where you were.
What should we,
Get that
if we're
off.
not going to these exoplanets, what should we care about them?
Well, I want to still research them, so that if in another generation we have enlightened human residents of Earth and exploration becomes a fundamental part of what it is to expand horizons, looking for solutions to all of your problems, as well as finding, well, the solutions come about because you have to innovate to do any of this. And innovations drive tomorrow's health, wealth, and security. So you have to get that for free. But I want to know if we found out if there's life there, that might trigger this 9-year-old girl to say, I want to visit that life. And then she'll invent a warp drive, and then we'll get there in, a few months rather than
Why does that tower even
400,000 years.
Are we gonna find life there?
Okay, I don't know, but there's a whole new emergent branch of my field, which you'll surely start reporting on when we finally have data. And it's called the search for biomarkers. If a planet moves in front of its host star, then the light from that star passes through the atmosphere on its route to us. Our sightline traverses this. And so that light is then kissed by the chemistry of that atmosphere. It leaves a fingerprint. Is there carbon there? You'll see it. Oxygen, methane, you'll be able to notice that. And some chemicals in an atmosphere are signatures of active life on its surface. No, we can't see the surface, but we can see the atmosphere. Oxygen on Earth. If you take away all green plants tomorrow, the oxygen level will drop to zero eventually, because oxygen is chemically reactive. It'll just find other things to react to, and it'll leave the atmosphere. And so oxygen in an atmosphere is not stable, but only in the presence of something that continually pumps it. If we find oxygen on these planets, she's going there.
All right.
Okay?
So we only have a couple more minutes. I want to leave time for questions, and I want to ask you about this thing that you call the cosmic perspective. But before I ask you to go fully cosmic, I want to go a little bit more personal. So I'm just, I told you I crowdsourced some questions, and I recently wrote a story about a program in New York City that's trying to get young Black and Latino students into STEM fields. And one of them saw that I was going to be interviewing you and sent in a question. And so this is from Brian, who's an 8th grader at a middle school in Harlem. Said, ask Neil deGrasse Tyson, how is life like being one of the most well-known astrophysicists in the whole U.S.? And how does it feel to be an inspiration to many people who struggle with life? Does he feel that pressure?
Always
Man.
aware.
That's an intense question. So
He's in 8th grade,
he's in 8th grade. Yeah.
asking existential questions.
Do you feel the pressure?
So
I mean,
first,
you
what's
are
it
not-
like? I'll tell you what it's like. So I can quantify fame. Okay? It's not how many times your name is in it. It's how many strangers walk up to you in the middle of the street and want a selfie, or in the day who want an autograph. Total stranger. That's a number. And 20 years ago it was a couple of weeks. I'd been on some PBS. And then it went to a few a day. Then it went to 20 a week. And just to 50 a week. And then 100 a week. And right now it's several hundred a day. No matter. So one of the biggest changes for me was I have to be a little better groomed each day.
Your middle tower has fallen.
I got a lot of questions about the mustache.
I'm
but
just
I
saying,
decided
I'm
not
just
to ask
saying.
about the mustache.
I gotta shave. Do I have BO today? So that's an extra effort each morning that I didn't have to previously put in. Because someone wants to take a picture, they're like right up under my armpit. And I don't want to be smelly. No, I'm serious. So this is time out of my day that I didn't have to spend previously. So there's probably a whole book I have not written because of personal hygiene that I now invest. Okay? Just, so I want a little bit of sympathy. And about how people feel or respond to me, I don't think about that actively. Because it's not, I'm not,
Tower is under
I don't do what I do to have that effect. Because that would imply that I wake up in the morning and say, how can I? No, a perfect day for me is when the phone does not ring and when my inbox is empty. That's a perfect day. And I can stay home, play with the kids, watch a movie on the couch with popcorn with slightly too much butter, and just veg. But what happens is I get called. I get called by the press when the universe flinched. I get called by a school. I get called by a city, by organizers of a theater, lecture hall. And they want to learn about the universe. And in that capacity, I'm a servant of the public's curiosity. And in that way, I'm not asking myself, how am I affecting you? I'm simply offering all that I can and all that I know of this beautiful universe in which we live. And that's what I do.
Hey, take a look at your
I think that's a good note to move on to the cosmic perspective. We just have an image of Saturn, of the Earth. Well, can you see we have and then can we see the next one, which is, so maybe you can explain to that.
Yeah, so we have right now a spacecraft orbiting Saturn. It's been there for a dozen years, but we have sent it into its death spiral to plunge a fiery death into the ball of Saturn, because it's outlived its useful life, and it's called the Cassini spacecraft. And for the first time, just a couple of weeks ago, the death spiral took it between Saturn's ring and Saturn itself. We never sort of crossed that, so we didn't know if the spacecraft would survive. So they aimed certain sensitive instruments back the other way so that they're not hit by any particles that might destroy them. So right now, this death spiral will continue through September, and I think it's mid-September or so. That's when it will plunge in and die. But it's gotten tremendous data, not only of Saturn's rings, Saturn itself, Saturn's moons. It's one of the great triumphs of the NASA program, as well as the collaboration with the European Space Agency. And what we see in this photo is, see that dot in the middle, that speck? That is Earth, seen through the rings of Saturn. And that harps back to the 1990 photograph that Carl Sagan encouraged NASA to take when the Voyager mission passed Neptune, the farthest planet from the sun. And he convinced it to turn its camera back towards Earth. That would be what Earth would look like as photographed by aliens coming upon our solar system. And it was just a pale blue dot. And he published a book called The Pale Blue Dot, where he waxed poetic and philosophical and political and cultural about the significance of seeing everything we care about, everything we've ever known, contained within just a few pixels of a photo. So you can think of this as an update. There's a pale blue dot 2.0. Let's see.
We're going to take questions, so if you want to line up at the microphones.
You can raise the house lights too.
But while they're coming, you talk about the cosmic perspective at the end of your book, and you're talking about kind of two things. Like one is like where we are in the universe, the spec, but you also talk about why we should care about space when we have all these problems here on Earth.
Yeah, so that's a common mantra. People see NASA doing these things, but we have these problems on Earth. Why are we spending it here when we should be spending it here? And I understand where you're coming from, but in my judgment, it is an underinformed perspective. Because suppose you were back 10, 20,000 years ago, what would you be saying? You'd be saying, don't leave the cave until we solve the cave problems. But I want to go over the mountain. There could be, nope, that's dangerous, and it has to cost. Solve the cave problems first before we leave the cave. That would have been you back then. Not only that, you'd think the dinosaurs should have been looking up at some point with an active space program. They'd still be alive, and we'd all be dinosaurs in this room. One of the ways our species will end will be from forces from space. While you're solving the problems on Earth, you then go extinct. You see? And not only that, the planet to our left is Venus with a 900-degree runaway greenhouse. The planet to our right is Mars, which used to have running water, but now does not. They're dried, meandering riverbeds, floodplains, river deltas, all the telltale signs of water coursing over its surface. Gone. Bone dry today. We don't fully know where that water went. We think a lot of it may be permafrost, but what we do know, it's not on the surface anymore. And these are planets that flank us in our journey around the sun. If you're going to say, let's solve Earth's problems, the solution might very well be when we compare our planet to other planets that are nearby. Not only that, there are other solutions that can emerge from the exploration of the unknown that can have application tomorrow that is undreamt of today. And we don't have time for me to give all the good examples, but I've written about this in an op-ed titled Science in America. You might hit a video of that first, but then look for the op-ed. You'll find it, and you can read it there.
Okay, let's take a question. Go ahead, you can start.
Dr. Tyson, thank you very much for coming to speak to us tonight.
Thank you. You're wearing one of the few actually legitimately sanctioned shirts with my name on it out there in the universe. Let's make America smart again. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. It's a Valentine's Day present for my girlfriend, who's also here. I had a question about astrology, actually. We know that astrology was debunked about 400 years ago, and yet I have many friends who consider themselves to be scientifically literate who still post, oh, well, a Sagittarius should do this, a Libra should do this, I'm such a Cancer, etc., etc. why is astrology still so pervasive in modern society, and how can we discount otherwise scientifically literate people?
So if you are suggesting that Sagittarius, the moon, or the sun in Sagittarius is affecting your life, no matter what else you know in this world, you are not scientifically literate. Okay? Period. So don't tell me these are scientifically literate people who say this. They're not scientifically literate. Okay. A. B. This is a free country. People ought to say, think, believe what they want. The issue is if someone who thinks that way rises up and then controls agencies where science literacy matters as part of the decision making. That's where the real unraveling of an informed democracy might occur. What do you do with that? Like I said, I'm an educator, so I'm not thinking of beating the adults over the head, be they just sort of regular adults or politicians. I go back to the educational system and say, we are missing a piece of this curriculum that needs to teach people what science is and how and why it works and why it is the most powerful way to decode what is true in nature that anyone has ever devised. That needs to be in there somewhere. And once you do that and you emerge as a voter, you will never again vote for someone who is scientifically illiterate. And so, but yet you can maintain whole colonies of scientifically illiterate people. They'll just never be voted into office. That's all.
I know that you're next, but I want that young person to ask a question first.
And how old are you? You're 10. Cool. Well, thanks for coming tonight.
Yes.
Cool hat, too. Okay.
Have astrophysicists ever seen a black hole?
Yes and no. Next question. No. So, we have a complete mathematical description of a black hole. And you really want to avoid them when you go space traveling in her warp drives. You want to map all the black holes in the galaxy. The problem is, how do you see something that does not emit light? Well, one way you can see it is it distorts the fabric of space and time in its vicinity. So as you're traveling through space, you see a star field. If all of a sudden the star field starts distorting madly, there's a black hole right there. Take a quick left and avoid it. If you're okay there, you just keep going. Now, another way we detect the presence of a black hole is if a star or a gas cloud wander too close. And if you get too close to a black hole, the black hole will eat you. And a star in its later years can expand. The sun will do this and ultimately engulf the orbit of the Earth. Have a nice day. Yes. Okay. So as the black hole flays the star, that's a grown-up word. It means to skins the star alive. Yes. That material. That's what the word means. I'm pretty sure. Okay. The gas spirals down. And as it spirals down, it heats up. It becomes so hot it begins to radiate. And it radiates ultraviolet and X-rays. So X-ray telescopes sensitive to X-rays, rather than just visible light, can find these black holes all across the galaxy. So that's how we find black holes. And so if you're going to go on a spaceship, get the black hole mapped before you go. Okay?
Okay, so first I want to say that I'm terrified, so excuse me if I have to. So, about our closest star, a red dwarf about 4.25 light years away.
About 4.25, yes.
Well, one of its planets is habitable, as in it's in the Goldilocks zone, technically, but it's currently lost, meaning it can't spin because of the gravity of the star. Now, why doesn't that happen to Mercury, as it's so close to the sun?
Ooh, very good. See, if I go right to answer that question, the whole lead part of your question is like shows a lot of research that you've done, and it's not common knowledge. the entire lead up to your question is not common knowledge. So I'll go straight to the answer, but I wrote an essay called Tides and Time. You can find it on the internet, probably I think on my website, Tides and Time, which will be related to this. So if you have a planet or anything that's orbiting close to something else that has strong gravity, tidal forces will slow down its rotation so that it'll only show one face to. One face to. And so when that happens, it's called being tidally locked. We have locked the moon. There's a far side of the moon, there's a near side of the moon. But there is no dark side of the moon. I don't care what Pink Floyd told you in 1973. Okay, so Pluto and its moon Charon are close to one another. They have double tidally locked. They show the same face to one another as they move around. Mercury does not, and it's because Mercury has a resonance, okay? Mercury feels the gravity of other objects in the solar system, in particular Venus. And when you feel another source of gravity, in addition to that of the sun does not succeed in totally tidally locking the planet. There's a tussle between the two objects.
Thank you, and I'm going to have to research half the words of that explanation.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Any thoughts on Tibanjix?
So we only have a few minutes. I want to go into soundbite mode so you can see how well I do with sound. Remember I told you what I did in the mirror? Remember I told you that? So we'll how many? We got 6 people left online. So let's okay.
Right, let's do it.
On literal lines.
Yeah.
6 people left on lines. Yeah. Okay.
I'm not John Stewart. In the forensic accounting world, of which I'm a practitioner, by the way, Dr. Tyson, you're what we would call a subject matter expert. We have subject matter experts of various fields talk to each other. You mentioned a little bit life sciences with those rays that come and we can measure the atmospheres. Here on Earth, regular people, how do you coordinate and cooperate with other multidisciplinary approach? And what do you find from those interactions, from those multidisciplinary sciences that are not necessarily your subject matter expertise?
That's a perfect question. NASA was one of the first out of the box to engage in this activity. And it created a funding umbrella called the Origins Program, where you want to think about the origin of life, the origin of the Earth, the origin of the solar system. People had to come together, the geologists, the biologists, the chemists, the astrophysicists. And once you have a common funding umbrella, people talk to one another. And whole new journals emerged out of that. A journal of astrobiology, a journal of astrochemistry. These are the kinds of results of the cross-pollination that takes you to places the separately stovepipe fields would have never reached themselves. So I think we were one of the first out of the box. It needs to happen in every profession. Yes?
Thank you.
Okay. Yes?
So my name is Orion, and I'm 10 years old. So I want to talk
Your name
to
is
you about...
Orion?
Yes. Like in Orion the Hunter.
So your question?
So why does your voice get distorted when you get near a black hole?
Why does what get destroyed?
Why does your voice get distorted when you go near a black hole?
Oh, your voice? No one will hear it. You're in space. So you can try to talk, but in space, not only can no one hear you scream, no one can hear you get ripped apart by a black hole either. Right. So other things get distorted, like the shape of your body, which should be a far higher priority of yours than wondering if your voice changes. I wrote a whole book called Death by Black Hole, which is exactly what you want to read. Okay, we got to keep going. Got to keep going. Yes.
Dr. Tyson, thanks for what you're doing for logic and scientific literacy. I appreciate that. I was shocked this week to learn that a friend of mine attended a Christian university where they teach that the Earth is 6,000 years old. And she said to me, well, she wasn't sure if it was true, but what does it really matter? And I get her point in that she wakes up, she goes to work, she comes home. Who cares? What do people like us do to convince her that it does matter? One idea is to maybe get you sign a book to her. But, but any other ideas you have would be
Yeah, sure. No, like I said, I'm a big fan of free speech. The fact that evidence that we're in a free country is that you can have a whole legions of people thinking the universe is 6,000 years old. That's created in six literal days. These are the fundamentalist religious groups. And part of the founding principles of the country was that people can come here and express whatever religion they want. The problem is, since we have a pluralism of religions, is that the right? We are religiously pluralistic.
Plurality.
Thank you. We have a plurality of religions as a consequence of this freedom to express religious beliefs. So what that means is, if someone rises to power with influence over legislation and they want to legislate that the universe is 6,000 years old, they're taking their personal beliefs and then forcing it on everyone else who doesn't share those beliefs. And the difference between an objective truth and a personal truth is that an objective truth is true whether or not you believe it, whereas your personal truth may be true for you, but someone else can have a completely different truth. So all it means is we should not encourage those people to have power over others. With pivoting on that belief system, we already know what kind of country that makes. It's called a theocracy. And this country made sure that we went as far away from any kind of governing system that has sort of a dogmatic foundation to it, which includes religions or deep political philosophies where they're insensitive to criticism. You have things like Nazism religion is not the only force that you would completely change what kind of country you have if it became the governing body. It's dogmatism that does it. Something that is no longer open for conversation or change. So all I can say is you don't see scientists picketing churches. Even if you have people who are religious trying to picket the science classroom, right? It's a non-two-way street there because we respect what they do. It's fine. Just tell them, give them an if-them statement. If they want to continue to believe this, and this spreads in the county and maybe the state, they're pretty much assuring the bankruptcy of their state going forward, because innovations in science and technology, where you understand what science is and how and why it works, will be the drivers of tomorrow's health, wealth, and security. And if you're not a participant on that frontier, you will be sick, dead, and invaded.
This is a hypothetical situation, right? A hypothetical.
So
Yeah, you need to go.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
He's very famous. He needs to go.
Oh no, sorry. I was double booked tonight. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. So sorry, everybody else on the line there. Yeah.
Yeah, we're really lucky to have you.
Okay.
It's a pleasure.
Sorry. Thank you.
Talk to you.
Wait, one quick thing. Wait, hold on. Come here. Give me a hand. Come here. Come up on stage. Because you were on the question line. Let's do this quickly. What was your question? Because you were on the back of the line. You got an elbow into the front of the line. Okay. You're the 9-year-old girl who said that you were good. Here.
I know that no one's ever seen inside of a black hole, but do you have any predictions what might be inside of a black hole?
I don't, but the people who came up with the mathematics of a black hole do. And there is a way to fall into a black hole where you're not ripped apart in a bloody string of atoms. So we can face the whatever. Okay. So there are some. If you spin a black hole, there's not a singularity there anymore. There's like a donut-shaped thing. So in some cosmologies, you can go through a black hole, and time will change for you. Time will go slowly, and for the rest of the universe, it will go quickly, and you will see the entire future history of the universe unfold behind you, and a whole new space-time continuum opens up in front of you. So it may be that black holes are portals to entire other universes. The problem is no one has yet volunteered to double-check that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I gotta run.
My spotter guides me. From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Thank you all for being here. My name is Congressman Randy Hultgren, and I am fortunate to be one of the co-chairs of the newly created bipartisan House Science and National Labs Caucus. Many of you are probably familiar with Neil deGrasse Tyson, but for anybody who isn't, he is basically the Chuck Norris of science. Not just a PhD astrophysicist, he's a ballroom dancer with several dozen honorary doctorates, nearly 1 million Twitter followers, all of us politicians are very jealous, and a vest collection that is legendary. His Twitter feed alone is, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating things available on the internet. Ranging from the fact that in 1492 it took 3 months to cross the Atlantic Ocean, but in 2010 it took 15 minutes for the space shuttle to do the same thing, to the more humorous observation that while Mars and the Milky Way and the moon all have candy named after them, no one has yet decided to name food after Uranus. It's not hard to see why Dr. Tyson was named as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. Before Dr. Tyson begins, I want to just say a quick word about the Science and National Labs Caucus. Representatives Fatah, Lujan, Nunley, and I founded this bipartisan caucus because all of us are inherently believe that basic research and scientific exploration are embedded in our national DNA. And with pervasive economic uncertainty, it's more important than ever that we reinforce our national commitment to these vital endeavors. Because science is a part of the identity of who we are as a nation. We may not know precisely what impacts these activities will have, but we know from past experience that an improved understanding of the universe enhances our lives in ways we can't even imagine. As a people, we strive not only for economic growth, prosperity, and job creation, but also for exploration at both our mental and physical frontiers, pushing ourselves against the boundaries of both our capabilities and our understanding. With a pedigree spanning a half-century, it is self-evident that basic research drives our understanding of the universe, and from that understanding, the payoffs are incalculably high, which is why science-driven technology has accounted for more than 50% of the economic growth of the U.S. economy during the last half-century. But science is an ecosystem, and we must not pollute it with political expediency, because this will always come at the expense of fundamental, long-term scientific research in which this nation needs to invest. So I hope that members of Congress and their staff here today take a look at our new caucus, because it's time for a cultural change here in Congress with respect to the understanding and appreciating the role that science plays in our quality of life, and that change is what we hope to accomplish in the caucus. I'll quickly wrap up by noting that over in the Rayburn building, there is a line from Proverbs engraved on the wall in the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and it says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And while that seems hyperbolic, I think in terms of the American spirit, it becomes exceptionally true. And there is no person in this country better able to inspire a vision than the astrophysicist, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. So please join me in this bipartisan co-chair of the Science and National Labs Caucus in welcoming Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Thank you. No, I just like messing with the sound guy, keeping them awake. So I gotta put my gum out. Thank you, first for that warm welcome, and all of you come listen to my cosmic and scientific musings today. I understand there's some voting going on in the House, so I try not to take it personally if the members need to leave. So we'll talk about you when you leave, I promise. I want to begin. Talking about an observation I made about 15 years ago, which changed my life. It changed my relationship with the public, with government. I was minding my own business. University land. And I was asked to write a chapter for the Columbia history of the 20th century. There's Columbia University as a publishing arm, and this was to reflect on and interpret events of the 20th century. It was not an accounting of events so much as it was an assessment of what it meant. The reason why I was not their first choice. This is 1996. Their first choice was Carl Sagan. But Carl Sagan had taken ill. He would die a year later. And they came to me next. And these are awesome shoes to fill. Just what? Now I have to write in some way that would match or rival that which you would have gotten from Carl Sagan. So I thought long and hard about this. They wanted me to write about discovery. And I said, okay, I don't know. I scratched my head, and weeks later, I said, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write about the transition from the discovery of places to the discovery of ideas. And that's an important transition in our species. Because it used to mean, oh, let's discover a new land. And you build a boat, or you hike there, or you ascend the mountain, navigate the valley, and then you found a new place. That was discovery. Not until the Earth got mapped did the urge to discover take us to another dimension. And it was the dimension of thought. The dimension of thought. So I said to myself, all right,
Your top tower is under attack.
Tell me about all the activities that the human species has engaged in its history. Because personally, I want to go to Mars. All right, well, I'm a little too old, but I want us as a species to go to Mars. That's a side thing I have. You don't have to want to do that too. It's just what I want to do. And I thought to myself, well, that is a place. It's not just an idea, but it's a place plus ideas. There might be life there. We might learn something. There are new discoveries in the new places. So I said, all right, what did people do in the past to engage in expensive projects? Because if we go to Mars, that's going to be expensive. And somebody's going to have to write the check if we did such a thing. Is that even justifiable to do this? Actually, we put the money in the bank and then they write the check. Okay, that's how we're all family here, how that works. All right, so I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at all the things humans have done throughout time. Find out what it cost as a fraction of the GDP of the day, and then ask how much does it cost to go to Mars today? And then line that up in the chart and find out what motivated them to do whatever was this other activity, and maybe we can duplicate that in modern times. That's how we would then engage in major funded projects, I thought to myself. So I thought this would easily fill the chapter, talking about ways people were motivated to do great things. I was going to, different chapters on all the different ways people justified it. And here's what I found. There were only 3 motivators in the history of human culture. 3 motivators that drove nations and states
Listen, middle.
to do great things. Great as in large, unforgettably magnificent, or unforgettably devastating. Just an investment of human and financial capital. We can make a list of what would go on that list, of what would be there. So the pyramids, that's big and expensive, and they're still around. The pyramids. By the way, do you know the next thing in human culture that exists that is taller than the pyramids? Eiffel Tower? The Eiffel Tower? What was it, 18,
Yes?
right? 5,000 years later, we figured out how to make something taller. Actually, there was a cathedral in the 1400s, but they didn't quite know how to sustain domes, so it was a short-lived. All right, the pyramids would be on there. The Great Wall of China, the Manhattan Project, the Apollo Project, the Columbus voyages. We'd all agree these are expensive things undertaken by nations. What did they have in common? Only one of three things. The greatest driver of them all is obvious. It's the I don't want to die driver, all right? The war driver. That's where you get the Great Wall of China. That's where you get the Manhattan Project. Time and again, the conduct of our species has demonstrated that if you feel threatened, money flows like rivers to minimize that threat or eradicate it altogether. No matter the project. There's another driver, the promise of economic return. That's how you get the Columbus voyages and Magellan voyages, Lewis and Clark. You get investments where people say, I don't want to die poor. Okay? There's a third driver there's less of today. Less of it today. Common centuries ago. And that's the praise of royalty or deity.
Cleveland's edge will never die.
That got you the cathedral building in Europe. Whole episodes where most of the GDP went into building cathedrals. Not most, big chunks of the GDP went into building cathedrals. The pyramids, that's praise of royalty. There's less of that today, hardly any of that today. You don't see whole nations investing huge amount of money in the service of God or their king. It just doesn't happen much. So there are two drivers. Two drivers. If you want to do something expensive and it does not fulfill one of those two drivers, it's not going to happen. Period. Unless you're going to claim that you live in a very special community that differs in its outlook on the causes and effects of investment and human dreams. If you have to say that you are different from every civilization that has come to this, I don't see evidence of it. Please drive. All right, I'm gonna get back to those. This new caucus that was established, Science and National Labs. Most people never heard of National Labs.
Your bottom tower is under attack.
No offense here, but I think I'm right. All right? What is a National Labs? You've probably heard of a few of them. Their names kind of resonate in the 20th century history books. Brookhaven Lab, Lawrence Livermore Labs, Stanford Linear Accelerator. You know, you get these places, and you knew some big physics was going on there. It is a community of centers where big research takes place. A lot of them owed their birth to sort of 20th century sort of military. It was like we knew that physicists are experts in matter, motion, and energy. And war is about putting energy that is here, there. That's all it is. Okay? If there's a target, you don't want that target to exist anymore, you take the energy that you created here and you put it at the target. That destroys the target. That is war reduced to its most fundamental laws of physics. All right. Well, I understand that. You can build centers because you feel threatened. There's a Cold War. Sure, I understand that. Even though I'm an academic, I understand that.
Your top tower is under attack.
1989, peace broke out in Europe. We almost had the largest accelerator in the world. Superconducting super collider. Started construction on it in Texas in the 1980s. It was the next frontier in physics. If you go in a place in energy that no one has been before, you're going to discover something. It's that simple. Because you're stepping where no one has stepped before. That is exploration in the laboratory.
Of course.
So here we are riding a century of American leadership in particle physics. You know the periodic table of elements? If I put the national flag on the box according to what nation discovered each element, there's quite a few there. Most of them are Western European nations. America is strongly represented. But you know where we're best represented? Down at the bottom, the heavy elements. After uranium, neptunium, plutonium, we have californium. We have berkelium. All right? If you discover stuff, you get to name it.
This will come in handy.
What a point of pride that was. Continuing that tradition, the physicists said, let's keep going. 1989 comes around. By the way, you can analyze this in other ways. I'm not going to stop you. But what I'm going to say is that when peace broke out, it became harder for people to justify, particularly those writing the checks, why you'd be spending this much money on physics anymore. The Soviet Union was gone. Budget got cut to zero. And that knocked out the frontier of particle physics in America. Well, interesting thing about science is that it continues anywhere else in the world. You don't have a monopoly on it. So CERN, the Center, that's the French spelling of the European Center for Nuclear Research. But I'm told that in French it spells the word CERN. The Centre Européen Recherche Nucléaire. Anyhow, they built the Large Hadron Collider, the most powerful particle accelerator in the world, and they discovered the Higgs boson. Page one story. Even here. We had American scientists there, by the way. And there are actually significant scientific contributions from scientists based, in fact, at Fermilab, who contributed to that discovery. But that fact got lost. The American contribution to that discovery got lost in the news cycle because it got discovered on European soil. So it just didn't, it's hard to take pride in something that someone else announces in another country. What they discovered was the Higgs boson. You know what that is? It's got a weird name. You know, the Higgs, it's a particle that grants mass. It's a particle whose field grants mass to other particles. In fact, it's been colloquially called the God particle. Because if you hand out mass, you're in charge, all right, of the particle physics. You're like, you're the one. And so the way it hands out mass, I give an analogy. I've heard this given, but I think I've improved on the analogy, but the origin of this example I don't take credit for. If you think of a party in Los Angeles, not in the East Coast, West Coast, Los Angeles party, and it's very crowded, and a really famous person walks into the party. So what happens? Everybody crowds around the famous person. So the famous person then cannot move very quickly through that party. No matter what they can't, they're sluggish through that party. They have a very high party mass. And if you're a nobody, by Hollywood standard, then no one will crowd around you and you can just walk freely through the party, unhindered. You have a low party mass. So the Higgs field is like a party in Los Angeles.
As you say.
You either have a high party mass or low party mass. And this is the interaction of the Higgs field with other particles. It's important, it's an important discovery. Nobel Prize will probably be given for it.
Heist.
We would have discovered that particle 20 years ago. Our accelerator was 3 times the power of that one. So that would have come out first day. Okay? Turn on the switch, pop, there it is. Higgs boson for you. All right, like a vending machine. Now, why do I mention this? Well, war isn't the only driver. Economics is too. It's a huge driver.
Your middle tower is full.
If we have a suite of centers that previously were in the service of defending the country in some way, because you hire physicists, and physicist is the physics of nuclei that led to the bomb that leads to advanced weaponry. I understand that. But economics matters too. Imagine if you took this suite of national labs and said, the country has needs. The country has, we want to engage in projects that are too big for a university. University is like a professor and maybe a lab. Some things require the government, and it's not immediately lucrative to do it. So corporations, their R&D can't justify it. There's this zone that can only be touched by the government dollar. If the government cares about its future. Look at the problems that energy and battery technology and nanotechnology and biofuels and maglev, and just go down the list. I want a country where you have a lab system where you walk by to say, oh, they're working on solving this problem that still befalls us. That'll feel good. Then you created the country worth defending. We're not waiting around for some other country to come up with our solutions. By the way, you can't require you can't say, okay, I want a more efficient transportation system and I need it in a year and a half. Okay, the engineers will work hard. But somewhere in there you need the scientists doing the basic research. The kind of research that a corporation can justify. They've got the quarterly report, they've got the shareholders, and they're looking for the return. And if the return is 40 years from now, they're not investing. But the country is here forever. In our minds, we want it to be here forever. So somebody's got to make the investment that goes longer than the time scale of the corporation. So you have the engineers working on the new physics, the new sciences, but you need the science as well. What are some examples of this? In the 1700s, we started to study the concept of heat, energy. In the days of Isaac Newton, my man, Isaac Newton, 1600s, the concept of energy was not formulated scientifically. It was not well understood. It would take another century. Then you get like the steam engine, and you start figuring out how to convert energy from one form into another. Mechanical energy, chemical energy, energy of gravity, gravitational potential. All these forms of energy can be converted into one another with the right machine. Thus was born the Industrial Revolution. And the nations that embraced the Industrial Revolution led the world in every metric that mattered in civilization, mattered to a civilization.
That kind of failure stings, doesn't it?
So, what would next happen? Middle 1800s. Michael Faraday.
course.
playing with electricity on a tabletop. He takes a wire and moves it through a magnetic field, and a dial jumps that the wire is connected to. So if you do this over here and something else happens over here, that's really intriguing to a physicist. You know, almost like a cat, you know, looking at the laser beam on the floor. You know, the physicist is, you know, it's kind of like a... And people said, Michael, his name is Michael Faraday, what are you doing? What are you wasting government money for? He has a famous reply to that.
Trick shot.
He said, sir, because I think it was a member of parliament who came and asked, is this what we're paying you to do, to make these tabletop toys? He says, I don't know of what use this will one day be, but I guarantee you, sir, one day you will tax it. Passing the wire through a magnetic field is how we generate electricity today. It is the foundation of all generators. Turbines. Anything that turns creates electricity and something else makes it turn. You're moving wires through magnetic fields.
An icy chill.
Why does that tower even cry?
That was in the mid-1800s. We didn't electrify cities until the turn of the century, the early 1900s. It took 50 years for his tabletop experiments in the hands of clever engineers and technologists to transform the world and how we lived. Now you just flick a switch on the wall, all the lights turn on.
You just lost your top tower.
What intrigues me is that so respectful of that era we are, that our lights even look like candles, you see? So in the back, we still have look at that, right? This is the 21st, you know, and I know this is an old building, but you can buy candelabras with electric candle bulbs in them, right? So, but it took about 50 years. You know what happened in the 1920s? Other than Hubble discovering Hubble the man, there was a guy who came before the telescope, just so we understand. In the 1920s, Hubble discovered that the Milky Way is not the only galaxy in the universe, there are billions more, and that the universe is expanding. Cool. But that's not why I'm telling you about the 1920s. The 1920s was the birth of quantum physics. You can't get crazier than quantum physics. Oh my gosh. Particles pop in and out of existence. You try to measure it and it's not there anymore, but you saw it there a moment ago. And it was intriguing. Once you get into physicists following, you know, the bouncing ball, weird, crazy things were going on inside the atom. Weird things. It's a curiosity. Enlightened nations funded that research. That's the 1920s. 50 years later, we would see the birth of the information technology revolution. Do you realize that, like, the last time I did a back of the envelope calculation, it was something like a third of the world economy is based on knowledge of quantum physics, because information technology requires quantum physics. In the design, in the creation of data, in the acquisition, the storage, the dissemination of information. That's why it's the IT revolution. It's not a computer revolution. Computers is there. It's all about what we're doing with information. It's no longer on a printed page, here's the information. No. No. I was on the airplane yesterday, and I got a note from a program installed on my father's computer that he's running out of disk space. I then sent an email to my sister's husband, said, check out my father's computer, something's dumping data onto. He goes and checks it out. Oh, there's a program run awry. We fixed it, everything's fine. I said, fine.
Yes.
And I did that while flying 200 miles in distance at 31,000 feet up. That's information moving that requires quantum physics. That was basic science, which at the time, surely there were people who say, what are you doing? I don't understand it. Why? Is that putting food on my plate? Is there some new weapon I can use to defend myself? People were surely asking these questions of quantum physics. But we had people who were curious about the nature of the world, and they pursued it, and they were allowed to by enlightened governments. And now, no part of the modern economy isn't touched by the fruits of the investment that went into those discoveries. This goes on and on and on. And that time delay was 50 years. Not 2 years. You know what I wonder? Maybe there should be a new law. I know we have too many laws, but a new law with every congressional session. What do you call the unit of 2 years in Congress? It's called something. A session. Terms, every congressional term, you've got to pass a law
Middle barracks under attack.
that enriches, benefits the country on a time scale longer than your re-election time scale. You have to. Wouldn't that be a great law? And that'll say, now we're thinking, I'm not going to be in office then, but I now have to care about tomorrow. Imagine what effect that would have. My physics professor in college, he liked gas clouds between stars. Yeah, okay. Everybody likes gas clouds between stars. He studied the behavior of the nuclei among the atoms in those gas clouds. And he hypothesized that in the presence of a strong magnetic field, that it would deflect radio waves that came by. He discovered the principle of physics called nuclear magnetic resonance as applied to the universe. Then a clever engineer said, wait a minute, if you can find out what kind of atom, because the nucleus is the identity of the atom, if you know what kind of atoms are out there by this method, maybe I can make a machine down here, and I can put you in the machine, and I can find out what kind of atoms are moving around your body. His discovery, which was awarded the Nobel Prize, became the magnetic resonance imager in every major hospital in the land today. Was he thinking about health? No. No. In fact, every machine in a hospital with an on-off switch that is brought into the service of diagnosing the health of your body is based on a principle of physics discovered by a physicist who had no interest in your health. The cross-pollination of the sciences is a fundamental part of what it is to progress in society. I hear people saying, oh, well, last century was the century of the physicist, but this century is the century of the biologist.
Your bottom tower is under attack.
Yes.
Okay, shut down all the physicists, and you'll be using the same machines today as you'll be using 100 years from now. Because you're not inventing the machine. You're not an engineer. If you're the biologist, you're not an engineer. You're not inventing a new principle of physics on which you would base the design of a new machine. All of this has to happen. And you can't sit there and say, how is that going to benefit you? We don't know in advance. But every time discoveries have been made, it has benefited us. We've got the track record to demonstrate it. I'm screaming at you, I'm sorry. I'm just getting me started here.
Your bottom barracks has fallen.
October 4th, 1957. What happened? Sputnik gets launched, and we freak out. Some of you are old enough, were like cognizant at the time. We freaked out as a nation. Perhaps justifiably, because it wasn't just a satellite. Yes, it had the nice name Sputnik. You know what that means? It means fellow traveler. Oh, isn't that nice? Fellow traveler. It's just it's just a basketball with sticks sticking out of it. Why should that matter? Sputnik was a hollowed out intercontinental ballistic missile shell. That was a shot across our back. The Soviet Union had the new high ground. They were flying over our heads, and there was nothing we could do about it. In came the I don't want to die driver. We said, we need me one of those. Let's get one of those. Let's start so we created, among other things, NASA. A year and a day later. I'm born the same week that NASA was founded. I feel NASA. We're like together, just moving through life. We're conjoined. Our souls are one. NASA's a civilian space agency, signed into law by an act of Congress. But who were the astronauts? They were military pilots. So wait a minute, if it's a civilian agency, we got what's going on here? Of course, NASA is created in reaction to a threat, and money flows like rivers. The war driver is in effect. The war driver. It's not how we remember it. We say, NASA, we explored the moon. We're discoverers. We're Americans. This is what Americans do. We're explorers. In the day, everyone has said, we're going to the moon. Oh, Mars is next. Mars is next. No, it's not next. It would be next if you go into space because you're an explorer. If that's why you went into space, Mars would be next. Did I mention exploration as a driver? No. It's not there. It's nowhere. It's way down the list of drivers. It's an insignificant driver. It's in the noise. We go to the moon because we perceive a threat. We go to the moon. Then we find out Russia is not really getting there. Soviet Union is not. We stop going to the moon altogether. And there are people saying, oh, we stopped going because we need leaders and people with charisma like Kennedy. And it's like, no. That's delusional. Well, look at Kennedy's speech. We will put a man on the moon, return him safely to Earth before the decade is out. That was stirring words. Those were stirring words. Given in a joint session of Congress, May 25th, 1961. He had charisma, you'll say. Is charisma on the list of why we did things? No. No. Go to Kennedy Space Center in Florida. There's a bust of Kennedy right at the front entrance, and a granite wall behind it. And chiseled in the wall are those words: we will put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. And you just feel, your spine tingles when you read that. You say, wow, that was an era where we really, go back to his speech. Go back. 2 paragraphs before he said, let's go to the moon, he comments on Yuri Gagarin, who had just come out of orbit safely. The first human mammal in space. He was the 5th living thing in space, by the way, in case you want. I tweeted this. Just go back, you'll find it. I said, congratulations, Yuri Gagarin, the anniversary of his orbit, the 5th mammal to achieve this feat, is what I said. And people say, oh, I didn't know that. Well, there's a dog, a couple of chimps, there was some lab rats, this sort of thing. And they all survived. Then we send up a human, and the human becomes the hero. But like, how about Laika, the dog, right? Then, wait, I got a quick aside. There are all these like animal rights folks that say, because Laika, there was no plans of bringing Laika back alive. I don't know if you knew that. Did you know that? It's kind of sad, actually. However, Laika was like a street mutt in Moscow. He gets lifted up and gets put into space and dies there. Now he's like the most famous dog ever since Lassie, you know? And the dog was going to die anyway at some point in its life. So I'm thinking it's the toast of dog heaven now. No regrets there. Sorry, that had nothing to do with. So, what was I saying before I interrupted myself? Thank you. So Kennedy is on the floor of a joint session of Congress. And he says, because 6 weeks earlier, Yuri Gagarin had come in and out of orbit. He says, in the same speech where there's the granite words, he says, if the events of recent weeks, doesn't even mention the guy, if the events of recent weeks are any indication of the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere, then we need to show the world the path of freedom over the path of tyranny. That was the battle cry against communism. That was the war driver. A speech without that in it would have said, that's nice, but we got other real problems here on Earth. We felt threatened, money flowed like rivers. President George Herbert Walker Bush, 20th anniversary of the Apollo landing. He said, I want to give a speech. I'm not in his head, but I'm imagining some of this was in his head. I want to give a speech like what Kennedy gave, just to get everybody excited. It's the 20th anniversary. It's an auspicious day. I'm going to give the speech on the steps of the National Air and Space Museum. An auspicious day, an auspicious place, an auspicious occasion. He said, let's go back to the moon, onto Mars, and make a space station, and we're going to take on space in a big way. 1989. Got costed out. Johnson Space Center. They said, let's see what this will cost. Let's take about 30 years and it'll cost $500 billion. It was DOA. Why was it DOA? Wait a minute, you know what NASA's budget is every year? It's about $17, $18 billion. Times 30, that's $500 billion. NASA's getting that money anyway. You can't now tell me you can't afford this plan if it was getting that money anyway in the flow. You can't. So why was it just DOA? Something else happened in 1989. Peace broke out in Europe. So of course we don't do it. I'm going to appeal to you in a way that most people don't. I'm going to tell you things other people are not telling you. You get people who are space enthusiasts, let's go into space, it's our destiny, it's our next, great nations do it. And I look at history and I say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Here's what we got to do. We've known since the Industrial Revolution and earlier that innovation in science and technology, yes, it'll help defend a nation. But when you're not at war, you know what else innovation in science and technology does? It is the engine of tomorrow's economy. The engine. When Einstein wrote down his equation for the stimulated emission of radiation, which is the foundation of the laser, Was he thinking to himself, barcodes? This is innovation in science, the applications of his ideas into machines requires the clever engineer, creative investors, and dynamic CEOs turn it into product. Don't ever tell me, why are you studying this? How is it helping me? You know, I don't know how it's going to help you. I have no idea. Neither did Faraday. He just knew you would tax it. Neither did Einstein. Neither did anybody who made great discoveries about our understanding and our relationship to nature. Do you know, who here remembers statistics? The method of least squares to put a line through points? That was discovered by Gauss, a mathematician, who applied it to the orbit of the first ever discovered asteroid. The asteroid went behind the sun, it's in the glare, you can't find it. He says, well, did this over here, look over here in 4 weeks. There was no methods to figure that out. He invented a new kind of math to do that. He was inspired by space. The stuff NASA does inspires people. Have you looked at the NASA portfolio lately? It's got biologists, chemists, physicists, astrophysicists, structural engineers. We build stuff in space. The International Space Station, the size of a football field, built in 0G.
It's your turn to ban.
The latest addition to the national labs, the International Space Station, I might add. So, if you have all these scientists, so here's the task. I stand up in front of a class of 8th graders, and I say, who wants to be an aerospace engineer so that you can design an airplane that's 10% more fuel efficient than the one your parents flew? There's some people who will require that of me as I stand up in front of that class. Instead, what I want to say is, who wants to be an aerospace engineer so that you can design the airfoil that will navigate the rarefied atmosphere of Mars? Everybody's standing up. Everybody wants to do that. We're a free country. You can't require people to do anything, but you can inspire them to completely rise to their intellectual and academic potential. Without that carrot, we will wither on the vine. It's not good enough just to have a good science teacher. You need something at the end of that pipeline when you're hatched out of the educational system. Now what do? It's a noble goal to have high-speed internet in the future and you know, public transportation. Sure. But are those the big dreams that get you running to school each morning to want to accomplish? I don't think so. Here's what happens. When science is funded big, all the sciences, by the way, all of them. But there's one in particular that is an actual force of nature, and that is the vision statement of our future in space. That's a force of nature. That stokes the pipeline. It gets people interested in science and all the sciences. And you know something? Even if you're not interested in science, you're interested in science. Let's say you want to become an attorney, but you've been sort of baptized in this grand quest to explore the cosmos. Then you're going to say, hey, I want to study space law. I want to find out who owns the materials on an asteroid, on the moon. Can you homestead there?
Good idea.
It's a whole law frontier. Oh, I'm going to be a screenwriter. I like these stories. I'm going to write a story on a mission to Mars or a mission to the asteroid or killer asteroid. When you do that big, everybody becomes a participant in it. Everybody. I brought with me
On the prowl.
Collier's magazine. Who remembers that? You have to be over 60 to remember
As
it.
you will it.
Can we get to Mars? Is there life on Mars? 1954. There was already talk about going to the moon, so it took it a step further. Because it thought that this was going on because we were just explorers.
Leap forward.
The V-2 rocket, designed by Wernher von Braun in the Second World War, used against London and other targets, was the first intercontinental ballistic missile. It was the first missile to leave the atmosphere and come back in.
Time to go.
Wait a minute, if you're going to go into space, you better study what that technology... After the war ends, if there's any way you're going to go into space, you better study that rocket. That's why every rocket in science fiction stories in the 1950s looked like the V-2. It had fins.
We ride.
It was bullet-shaped. Did you just take a picture of me like this? Okay. So the influence was huge. People's visions of space. The spaceship had fins, and you know what else had fins? Our cars had fins. If you go to the designers, they're not going to say, oh, I did this because rockets have fins. It was in the air. Exploration of space became part of our culture. The first time we ever left Earth was Apollo 8. Doesn't get the attention it deserves relative to Apollo 11. These three astronauts were men of the year.
Good idea.
1968, Anders, Borman, and Lovell. They orbited the moon, Apollo 8. They took this picture.
Hit him.
Get her while you can.
I'm almost done. Boat or something. We'll go somewhere.
Yes.
If you have a healthy science program in your country, you guarantee your economic future. You're innovating. Then you don't have to have arguments about tariff regulations on products. You don't have to worry about jobs going overseas because they don't know how to do it yet, because you just invented it. I can't stand it when I hear these discussions about our job force. I have to close my ears. Yeah, you can put up some tariffs. Yes, you can complain about they're paying their workers less. Sure.
I'm under attack.
Okay.
Forward by bounds.
But as long as you understand why you're in that situation, it's because you've stopped innovating, everybody else has caught up with you, and it's, if you have a global economy, it's the job of the corporation to make it for as cheap as possible, so they're going to make it overseas. That's what they're going to do.
Good idea.
It's incumbent upon them to do so. But if you keep innovating, the stuff stays here. The jobs stay here. You don't even need to have tariffs because there's nothing to tariff.
Good idea.
You assure the economic stability of your future. So when I hear people say, oh, we can't afford NASA, we can't afford it, we can't, it's like, you can't afford not to. Otherwise, you're putting Band-Aids on all your problems. Do I have this here?
Agreed.
This is my wallet.
This one's
I would do this, but they wouldn't let me carry
track.
my scissors on the airplane. You can take $1, okay,
As you will it.
and cut off this edge, but don't get into the ink. Okay? And cut off the other edge, but don't get into the ink. Those two amounts of this dollar,
To the battle.
that's the R&D budget of the United States. The rest is everyone complaining that our economy
Yes.
is losing ground in the world.
An easy shot.
Your urge is to get the solution.
Run like the dogs you are.
Your urge is almost never, let's invest in something that will pay off in 50 years.
Leap forward.
Do you know the culture that ensued in the 1960s? The World Fair was all about tomorrow. We were going into space. We knew we needed scientists and engineers and mathematicians. They're the folks who dream up a new tomorrow. That's how that works. The World's Fair didn't create the 1960s. The 1960s created the World's Fair.
Good idea.
And there's the 1960s, the most turbulent decade in American history since the Civil War. Assassinations.
As you will it.
The Civil Rights Movement. A hot war in Southeast Asia. A Cold War with Russia.
Tuck your tail and run, you mutt.
Yet we found time to go to the moon. Motivated by war, for sure.
Since you command.
But our economy was pumped. The GDP per capita
Anywhere.
from 1950 to 1960 made the highest jump across a decade than it has since then. The change in GDP per capita has been dropping ever since the 1960s. What, nobody notices that?
On track.
Oh, they overanalyze. Well, GDP, well, it's the we gotta fund this factory and this thing, and everybody's trying to microanalyze it, yet there's an elephant standing there in front of you.
Attack.
Not only did it stoke our economy, something else that it did.
Forward, pet.
Something else.
Forward by bounds.
See this photograph? It's the most recognizable photograph ever. Earthrise over the lunar surface. Taken in 1968 by Apollo 8.
Spoil that shot.
1968, the bloodiest year in the most turbulent decade since the Civil War. This photo was published.
You know that all-important middle tower?
Do you realize that until that photo was published,
Good idea.
nobody thought to draw
An
Earth
easy shot.
with clouds on it? Every representation of the Earth before that photo was just Earth. That's kind of interesting. We didn't think clouds were part of us. That's not Earth. Those are clouds.
Agreed.
In 1962, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring,
As you will it.
which was many environmentalists credit that book for starting the environmentalists.
Leap forward.
They're wrong. Plain and simple, they're wrong.
Forward, pet.
You can do a Google search on words, the frequency of words used in all published books in any given interval of year. And you can ask, what's the frequency of the word environment? That's a word that would show up if you care about it.
Good idea.
And let's watch the frequency of that word across 1960. It was a best-selling book. It makes a little bump and then comes back down again. When that photo was published,
I'm under attack.
the word environment, the usage of the word environment triples
To the
in
battle.
published literature. When that photo was published.
Yes.
By the way, Earth does not rise on the moon. The moon always shows the same face to Earth. So the Earth is just simply always there. So it's misnamed Earthrise. It's easy to want to believe that Earth rises on the moon the way the moon rises on Earth. That's just false. It was rising because they're in orbit around the moon. And when you orbit something, stuff rises that wouldn't otherwise do so. Just a disclaimer there.
Born to strange sights.
This gets published. It's the first mission to leave low Earth orbit.
Radiant structures are fortified.
For the hunt.
A year later, Apollo 11, they land and walk on the moon. Steve Jobs is 14 years old. Bill Gates is 13 years old. Just an FYI. ARPANET begins 1969. So what else happens now that we see this moon and Earth rising above it? Here's the list. You ready? 1970, a Comprehensive Clean Air Act is passed by Congress, December 1970. The first Earth Day In San Francisco on the spring equinox, 1970. The first National Earth Day, April 1970. The Environmental Protection Agency is formed in 1970. We are still at war in Vietnam. Students are getting shot on campuses. There's no accounting for this, except that photo.
Hey, go other lane.
On track.
You might remember the Hellstrom Chronicle. It was a pseudo-documentary movie that talked about insects going out of control from overuse of pesticides. There's an organization founded in Switzerland in 1971 called Doctors Without Borders. Where'd they get that phrasing from? When we saw this moon rising, we saw Earth rising over the moon, Earth revealed it to us as nature had intended. Not as a color-coded map designating nations and states, but of oceans and land and clouds. There are no borders. You look at that picture. Without that picture, they would have said, oh, international doctors.
As you will it.
Referencing nations. This picture references no nations at all. By the way, if you ask any one of these people, they'll say, oh, it just felt like the right word. Oh, it just made sense. Space was in our culture so deep that you just think stuff up and you think that you just thought it up. DDT, a big issue in Rachel Carson's book in 1962. It was not banned until 1972. We're still going to the moon. The whole Earth catalog uses this photo as its cover. Thinking of Earth as a whole, not Earth as an assembly of nations. The Comprehensive Endangered Species Act, December 1973. The first catalytic converter for cars, 1973. Unleaded emission standards were established, 1973.
Good idea.
Why didn't all that happen 10 years earlier? 5 years earlier.
Stop.
It happened after that.
Hey, stop farming.
And it started immediately.
Forward, pet.
Our culture transformed.
Agreed.
There we were saying, we're going to explore the moon. Yes, driven by military money. It stoked our economy. We're going to explore the moon. We got to the moon, and we looked at Earth for the first time.
We rise. Stop.
Established a cosmic perspective that completely transformed who we are, how we relate to one another, and how we think about our moon.
Yes.
So I submit to you that what a lesson this was. We embarked on an activity that was driven by military motives. And out the other side came economic gain and a new perspective on who we are in this universe.
On track.
Turns out you don't need the military motives. Once you know there's an economic driver, that's a good driver too, history shows.
I'm under attack.
So all it takes is a little bit of foresight. Be a little less parochial, not only in region, but in time. And this nation can rise up and become again what I remembered it to be and perhaps had taken for granted of what it was. Because if we don't act, we're just standing still, and the act of standing still is the same as moving backwards when everyone else is in motion.
Stop.
All around us, around the world. So it's an economic battle cry, if you will. I don't doubt our military resolutions. If China said they want to put military bases on Mars, we're there 10 months later. We're so there, all right? They could probably pull that one off because Mars is already red, you know, so the marketing of that would be easy for them. But I want to go to China just to tell them to leak a memo. They want to put and then we just would go for it. So it just takes a few extra steps to see the economic drivers that are at work here. You are pumping into your society people whose ingenuity creates new economies. It's got nothing to do with spin-offs. Yeah, we all like the spin-offs. LASIK surgery and cordless power tools all came from NASA. Grooved pavements in the road so you don't roll your car on a turn. That all came from NASA. But that's not the biggest thing that comes from research. NASA is like the poster child for discovery and what it can do for a nation.
Yes.
Because no one ever stood up in school and said, when I grew up, I want to be an NIH researcher. It just does, they don't do that, right? So you need the poster, explore, discover. And then the lawmakers will know, if you do that, you pump our economy. The kids will do it because it's fun. They want to stay kids the rest of their lives, as I have. And we will rejuvenate the nation with that ambition. And we can enter the 21st century as the leaders we were coming into it. And that's my message. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think I went a little long, and I'm sorry about that, but I have a little bit of time. I'll write you a hall pass if you have to get back to your job. I want to take questions from you, and because that's my favorite part, because pretty much I already knew what I was going to say. So just raise your hand. But thanks for coming if you have to go and get back to solving the problems of the world.
On track.
A question? Yes, sir. I'll repeat it if you can't hear. Go.
Out of my way.
We got a microphone.
Thank you.
Leap forward.
I was wondering how far away you think we are from an industrial application of fusion power.
To the battle.
How far are we from an industrial application of fusion power? Fusion is the most common production of source of produced energy in the universe. We can make fusion too. We're really good at it. It's called a bomb, right? And so the whole challenge here is to control the fusion, not the simple act of getting fusion. So applications of fusion, what you're really asking there is, when will we have applications, not to put a question in your mouth, but I don't care that fusion is the bringing together of atomic nuclei. I care that fusion is a source of energy for us. So the real question is, what are the prospects for other sources of energy in the world in the future? That's really the question. And fusion is a contender. Solar power, I tweeted yesterday, I'd be embarrassed to show an alien that we kill each other to extract energy sources from the sands when the universe is full of limitless amounts of starlight. And by the way, someone was reading my tweet, someone asked, when I compose my tweets, am I high? So it was weird. One time I was distracted by a doily, and I was concerned that not enough people paused to reflect on the beauty and majesty of a doily. Right? Just think about what a doily is, and it's just to sit under your cup. And
I take my answer.
I gotta tweet something about that. Hang on a second. Let me do this. Just be a moment. That's right, because I'd already started. So my response will be to those who ask, am I high? Knowing that the sky sits the sky sits above the entire Earth. That should tell you that the study of the universe
Once more into the
is itself a state of natural high. Tweet.
forward by bounds.
Okay. There's no service here, so it'll go out in an hour.
Since you command it.
So, another question. You can get through. Yes, sir, on the corner, on the side.
On the prowl.
Your middle tower is under attack.
There's been a decrease in funding in NASA progressively, and then other companies private companies take up the slack in that.
Yes.
Do you think that will hinder or help NASA in the long run? That other private companies are trying to take the place of NASA?
Thanks. There's like 4 different things going on in that very simple question. And I want to separate the variables, as we say in math, and I'm going to hit them one at a time.
As you will it.
The relationship between NASA and private industry has been around since the beginning. Grumman on Long Island made the LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module. It's still a point of pride. You walk down the streets, the engineers from that era are still talking about it. Anybody who was a participant in that era, forgetting that it was completely driven by war, were nonetheless enchanted by the fact that we were going to the moon.
God bless.
So there's always been private enterprise participating in NASA's needs. That's not a new thing. The difference is, will NASA have the private enterprise as a link between where they are and where they need to go? They got to get to the space station. To use a shuttle or let someone else take you there. That should have been happening 20 years ago. Does the post office have its own airplanes? No. You rent space on the belly of a commercial carrier, put the mail on there, and it gets you there faster, cheaper, better, with the efficiencies of private enterprise. NASA
On track.
knows how to get to low Earth orbit. It is not a space frontier. Save NASA for frontier work. And by all means, farm out
Forward, pet.
the routine parts of what it is you need to do. By all means.
Yes.
Should have happened long ago.
Since you command.
Here's the difference. Private enterprise
We die.
will never leave a space frontier. And I've gotten into arguments with people about this, and then they walked away. Because they didn't want that to be true, except it is fundamentally true. Space is large. It's dangerous. And if it's space we've never been before, the frontier, the risks are unquantified. When those factors converge, you cannot create a capital market valuation of that activity. There are no investors.
No defeat.
Oh, let's go someplace. You might die. We don't know if you're going to come back. We don't know how much it'll cost, and we don't know the risk.
More of that.
Give me your money now. That's not how capitalism works. Okay? So the people who take the risks are governments.
On track.
Governments. The first Europeans to the New World
As you will it.
were government funded. Columbus drew the maps, checked the trade winds, found out who were the nice Indians and the bad Indians, and is there food over there, and what are the safe routes and the harmful routes. He brings that back, that gets disseminated. Then the Dutch East India Trading Company comes into play. There is no case in the history of commerce where corporations,
Forward by bounds.
capitalized by investors, did something that was hugely expensive and dangerous and unquantified risks.
Where's the enemy's middle tower?
Good idea.
So,
I was just.
by the way, there are a couple of companies, one recently announced, that want to mine and exploit asteroids. We've been to asteroids. We know how to do that.
Radiant just
It's an engineering frontier to figure out how to scoop it up and bring it and exploit it and use it and take it to the moon, bring it back to Earth. Sure. That's within the investigative latitude of a company to attract interested venture capitalists? Sure. But if we had never been to an asteroid before? No. No. Newt Gingrich even made that mistake when he said, give the money we've given to NASA, to the private industry, we would have had colonies on the moon, on Mars by now. No. Well, yeah, sure, if you pay someone, but then it's not a business model. Yeah, it could be a vanity project. Go get Bill Gates. Bill, take us to Mars. He could do it. It's private money. It's not a business model. He's not making money doing that. Sure, you can just spend the money and do it. But if you wanted to turn a space program into a space industry, there's got to be some return on that investment. And that has historically been the role of governments. You can't have one without the other. More power to all these companies that want to participate. I foresee the day when the entire solar system is just our backyard. And whatever nobody's done before, that's what NASA's doing.
On the prize.
Yes, on the side. That's what you think. Did you hear what he just said? No. He said, I don't need a mic. Now you can hear. Yes.
Among the things that I would think would be a leading driver towards I don't want to die is being hit by an asteroid, being hit by a comet, being hit by
Being hit by an asteroid counts as I don't want to die. Yes.
Yes. And yet,
no, that one, I don't want my species to go extinct. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
And yet, somewhat inexplicably, you keep seeing proposals for asteroid defense research, asteroid defense programs not getting the funding they want. And I was wondering if you might have an idea as to why.
Because the election cycle is shorter than the asteroid impact cycle. Why would you spend money in your electoral?
As you will it.
Why would you spend your session's dollars on something that doesn't affect your session? So it's a short-sighted, it's a cultural short-sightedness. But I have a better solution. Oh, by the way, there's a great comic where one dinosaur is saying to the other, now is the time to invest in an asteroid deflection system. So I have a better solution. Your space activities are not simply, what do we do now? Oh, let's all go to Mars. Okay, what next? Oh, let's go to Venus. No. That's not an exploration program.
Good idea.
Those are one-offs. The moon was a one-off. What you need to do is have a suite of vehicles. That's my suggestion here. We got the engineers to make this real. You get a suite of launch vehicles that can be combined in different ways, different strap-on solid boosters, liquid, whatever is the combination, so that I can walk up and say, today I want to go to the backside of the moon. Oh, there's 3 of these rockets, 2 of those, 4 of these will launch in a week. I want to do science on Mars. Oh, that's these 3 rockets and this, and you need this life support system because you're not coming back for 3 years, and fine. The military says, well, this new cislunar space is the new high ground, the space between Earth and the moon's orbit. We need to set up some laser tracking places in sort of trailing orbit to the moon around the Earth. Okay, that's this satellite, this launch pad. Oh, there's an asteroid coming. Oh, check with the mining guys. They have ways of tugging an asteroid from one location to the other because they've done it to bring the rare elements, the rare Earth elements, to, by the way, elements that are called rare Earth are common elsewhere. Okay? They're just rare on Earth. They're asteroids where they're common. And so then you phone up the guys and say, we got a new orbit on asteroid 2782. It's going to hit Earth in 37 years. Can you deflect it a few centimeters? That'll buy us another 50 years, and we're worried about it then. That's the spacefaring future that I foresee that we don't yet have, and we're far from. Yes.
Forward, pet.
Oh, thank you. I have a radio program called Star Talk. It's kind of irreverent, but we're just really having fun with science. So thanks for the plug. Yes. Okay.
I try. What direction would you personally like to see the House Science and National Labs Caucus go in the realm of physics?
Yeah, so I think, I'm partial to physics because there is no understanding of chemistry without physics, and there is no understanding of biology without chemistry. So
To the battle.
every century is a physics century as far as I see it, because the rest of the sciences derive their greatest discoveries from it. So you got to fund them all. And I see the labs, which have historically been physics, why not bring them to bear on all the nation's grand challenges that befall us? And when we're not at war, that gives you the opportunity to solve other kinds of problems. But you need the cadre of scientists there just studying the limits of our knowledge. And you want to be able to transfer the freshly discovered knowledge into product. So you want to develop a community of technologists who say, wait a minute.
On track.
You need those folk. Plus you need folks who visit one center to the next. If I had an oven with coal, like a Franklin stove that runs on wood, and I say, I give you $1 billion, no, too much. I'll give you $1 million. Make me a better stove. And you're an expert in heat transfer and thermodynamics, and you know you're good, right? And so you design an oven that's insulated and temperature controlled and self-regulating. No matter how much time I give you, and no matter how much money I give you,
Forward, pet.
you will never invent a microwave oven. That came from military research and communications with microwaves. And we kind of stumbled on the effect of microwaves on food, because water is a major ingredient in food, and microwaves tickle the water molecules when they're hot. And then someone said, hey, if it does that to water, it'll do that to my food. Let's make a cavity.
Of course.
Call it a microwave oven. Somebody's got to waltz among the tents. Someone clever and ambitious, and maybe has a nose for profit. That always helps as well. The second biggest driver ever.
Agreed.
I don't want to die poor driver. Oh, you have a question?
On the prowl.
Hi.
Hello, how old are you?
8.
You're 8. That is such a cool age to be. When I was 9, that's when I discovered the universe. But you're here already, so you've already discovered something. I like your shirt.
You realize
Okay, so what's your question?
Jax could take
The question before the last question, answer gave me a question. So, the asteroid's coming at us. Why don't we try to fling it into orbit around the Earth? Like the moon.
Yeah, so you want to save the world. Is what that's really a good thing to want to do. Well, there are people out there who
Invisibility.
see, here in America, we're really good at blowing stuff up, okay? And we're less good at knowing where the pieces land afterwards. So yeah, we've got some leftover missiles, and we could try to destroy the asteroid, right? So that would be, let's blow the sucker out of the sky. That's the macho, that's the testosterone way to do it. But the kindler, gentler way would be exactly what you said, to deflect it. It's still there. It could harm you another day. But to deflect it takes so much less energy. You could test it to see if you have succeeded. There are plans on paper,
To the battle.
which means we know how to do it, we think. But no one has given us money to build the spacecraft to actually do it. So here's what will happen. The asteroid will come. It's too late to vote money to create the spacecraft. And then we all go extinct, holding the piece of paper, saying how we would have, the paper is like sticking up above the ground. And I don't want to be the laughing stock of the galaxy with all the aliens looking to Earth and say, those stupid humans. They had opposable thumbs, they had a space program, but they didn't deflect the asteroids, which makes us no better than the proverbially pea-brained dinosaurs of the world, who themselves did not deflect that asteroid because, of course, they had pea brains. So it's a great idea, and you're the right age, so that if one comes around, I want you to save the world, okay? And then they make movies about you, and you'll be a hero. You're already a hero for asking that question that no one else in this room thought to ask. You gotta watch out when you ask questions around adults. You can embarrass some grown-ups that way. But don't worry about it. And they need to be embarrassed much more often than they are. Another question right here, sir.
You did the interview.
Well, you began that sentence with an
I apologize.
This is Washington, D.C. We are educated people.
I'm nervous. I apologize.
Okay.
You gave an interview with the New York Times a while ago where you were asked about the most astounding facts. Is that still the most astounding fact, or has Higgs boson changed that?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. A reporter came to my office in New York and asked me 10 questions, the last of which was, what's the most astounding fact that I know? And so there it lived, on the internet for years. And somebody took my answer, then somebody decided they liked the answer, and they took it and made a YouTube video of it with some exciting visuals to match my words. The video went viral. It's like got a couple. So it's not as viral as the kitten falling off the piano, but it's as viral as any science video that I've seen has gotten. And I invite you to just look Tyson and astounding. That ought to land you right on it. They asked, what is the most astounding fact that I know? And I just went off on it. And I will not tell you the answer. I know you. So many of you have seen it. You must have, because it's went viral. But yes, that's still my most astounding fact.
Of course.
Sorry about the rest of you. Yeah, I think it's rising through 2 million views, and 4 million views. So I'm very moved by that fact. It means there is an untapped hunger that my activities serve. Because that's what I am. I'm a servant of the public appetite for the universe. And occasionally I might awaken an appetite you didn't know you had, but really I'm just a servant, showing you the universe that's already there.
Your top tower is under attack.
Yes?
Hi. You are obviously exemplary in your ability to communicate science and science stuff to non-scientists. How, in your opinion, would it best, how can we best inspire other scientists to follow in your example?
Wow.
As you wish.
The problem is our community is not rewarded by their ability to communicate with people who don't already know their vocabulary and their jargon. There's no return to the community on that. And for the longest while, you were looked down upon. In fact, there's blood on the track from Carl Sagan's era for the fact that he reached out to the public. When he appeared on Johnny Carson, what? A scientist on TV? On entertainment television, not just on a documentary, and exchanging jokes with a comedian? And so we've come a long way since then, especially my field, astrophysics. In no small measure because of the efforts of Carl Sagan. So I can stand here and do this, and I can host a radio show with comedians, and we crack jokes all the time. There's scientifically literate jokes, but we're just slapped.
Good idea.
And I can still be invited to Caltech and give a seminar, go to MIT and meet with their advisors. So my field has reached that level of, I would call it, political and cultural maturity. There are other fields that have not. I've seen it. Many branches of physics, that is not the case. Geology, that's not the case. And so, more evidence that I think we're pretty good at this is go to the bookstore and go to the science section. Most of the science books, not including health and human health and nutrition, most of the science books are universe books, and you can tell because all the bindings are dark because it's some cosmic photo, some Hubble photo on the jacket. So I think we're doing pretty good, and I'm a cog in a very big wheel. And by the way, The State University of New York at Stony Brook, Long Island, just created a new branch of itself to train science professionals to communicate science. So the trend line, the vectors are in the right direction and have the right slope.
On the prowl.
But it's hard, and to change a culture always takes effort. And so I'm not as pessimistic as you are, perhaps. Okay, that was a 2 thumbs up. Yes, back row there.
Good idea. Forward by bound.
How did you, sorry. How did you...
Let's start the question again.
Sorry. So besides being clever enough to be born after Carl Sagan and choose astrophysics that was culturally ready for your skills, how did you develop those skills? And what advice do you have for other scientists who want to follow?
I think being socialized matters. You gotta just know how to have a conversation with somebody. And many other academic branches do. You know, literature majors, history majors, and all the majors that lead to you becoming an attorney, for example. You need social skills to communicate your ideas, to argue, to... So I don't think it takes much. You just have to be able to talk to somebody and not put them asleep. And then you grow that audience from 1 to 5 to 10. And it's not a matter of, are you afraid that someone in the audience knows more than you do? You come from academia, you know more than everybody in the audience. That's a gift. All right, so it's really a social force here, not some other kind of anxiety. And I think I've been socialized my whole life. My father was a sociologist, was active in the civil rights movement in New York under Mayor Lindsay. My mother was a housewife, went back to school, became a gerontologist. So I was their nerd kid, their astro nerd kid, but every time I came home, I understood what it meant to be sociable and to interact with other people. So it's quite natural for me to take what I love, the universe, and just talk about it. It's not an extra effort. It's a natural effort. It's like asking, what does your living room look like? Well, I got a couch here and a picture there and an area rug here. What does the universe look like? Well, it's big and it's 13.10 billion. It's my living room. And I'm sharing it. So I don't think the challenge is as hard as people think. Now, it is a little different. I do some things that I don't expect anybody else. Like my Twitter stream. It's just completely weird stuff in there sometimes. And it's just weird. Other things I do, on my radio show, I am cavorting with comedians. That's because I happen to be deeply respectful of the comedic arts. Deeply. I think they carry the soul of our culture in their banter. And so I'm very comfortable in the presence of witty comedians who are sharp, clever, and even barbed. When I give lectures, have a handheld microphone because they have handheld microphones. You know why? Because, for example, if I were describing the next asteroid that may render the west coast of the United States, may obliterate the asteroid Apophis, I get to say it like this. Apophis is named for the Egyptian god of death and darkness.
As you will it.
I get to do that with my microphone. If it's a lavalier, I gotta go. Little things like that. Yes, so you learn those, and I've developed those over the years. And it allows me to have a radio show where I talk to comedians, and I have as guests actors, politicians, authors. I don't have scientists on my radio show. You know why? Because there are people who will not listen to a radio show if it has a scientist on it. So I turn the table around and say, I'm the host and I'm the scientist, and you're going to follow your favorite person to that show. You're a fan of that politician, of that actor, of that writer, of that comedian.
To the battle.
And you know something? That person is going to have a conversation about science with me. their fan base follows them to that program.
Not a penny wasted.
I don't expect everybody to do that. That's a lot of effort for me to pull that off. But just talking about your research that's tax-based funded,
Forward by bow.
if you resist that, I don't know that you even have a right to be a scientist. It's your obligation, it's your duty. And if you're not that fluent, socially fluent, then create a website. Write an op-ed. There are lots of ways to intersect the public, and right now, hardly any of them are rewarded in the field.
On mine enemy.
So yeah, I work at it when I'm called
On the
to.
prowl.
Otherwise, I'd rather just stay home and watch the ball game. I'm perfectly happy there, by the way. Let me take one last question, and then we'll wrap it, okay? Right here in the middle, yes.
Double damage.
You started with an again.
One of the things that I'm aware that you're doing that I think is great for getting the public interested in science is working with the Jizza on his album about science. Can you tell us about what's going on with that?
Okay, actually, the Wall Street Journal got the story wrong. I'm not collaborating with him at all. Next. No, I do want another question because that was not. She was misinformed. I had the Jizza, who is a rap star, a hip hop artist, on Star Talk Radio. Why? Because his next album, the lyrics on his next album are inspired by cosmic themes. He's rapping about the Big Bang and the expanding universe and gravity and dark matter and dark energy. You know a subject has been embraced by pop culture when artists take ownership of it. When that happens, you become in the mainstream of thought in the culture. And so that was one of our more successful episodes of Star Talk Radio. A rap star. What's the stereotype? Oh, the gun shootouts at rap concerts, right? And here's somebody who's actually making a difference with his rap lyrics. And I didn't let that go unnoticed on my show. So no, but we're not collaborating. But if he calls me up and said, you know, I need a word here, you know, I got cosmic word, I can hook him up. You know, we got vocabulary. Good vocabulary, too. None of this stuff like geologists. Well, this is orthoclase feldspar. No, I can't rhyme that. I'm sorry. Oh, this is deoxyribonucleic acid. Can't rhyme that either. Big Bang, black hole, quasar, pulsar. Spots on the sun, sunspots. Red spot on the sun, on Jupiter, Jupiter's red spot. We got vocabulary to burn here. I would take one last question, and it better be awesome, because it's the last question. Is it awesome? We'll be the judge of that. Go, sir. And the last question, thank you all for coming after this. Yeah.
I'm also a big fan of Star Talk, and a couple of months ago, you had thrown a fact out there about black holes, and that a black hole the size of a quarter could actually devour the Earth-sized planet, Earth-sized planet.
Oh, easily.
And I've heard you talk about black holes.
Have you not slept well since then?
No, it's not that. It's not that. I would like to know what that would look like. Would our atmosphere be the first thing to go? Would things become oblonged and sucked into it like what you imagine, or would it break apart?
To the battle.
I mean, how do you get something the size of the Earth to fit into something the size of a quarter?
We ride.
Yeah, so I recently a year ago I tweeted, we have these things called pulsars, which are very dense matter. It's like the densest matter there is before you collapse into a black hole. So to put that in context, how dense this material was, I said, take a herd of 50 million elephants and cram them into a thimble. Then you get the density of the material on a pulsar. So in other words, scoop up a thimble's worth of pulsar material, put it on a scale, on a balance scale, and then I say, what do I have to put on the other side here to balance that thimble? I have to put 50 million elephants here. So that's an extraordinary extreme of nature. In fact, in my field, we have to be parsimonious with our descriptive adjectives. I can't say Jupiter's gigantic. Well, it is compared to Earth, but it's small compared to the sun. I can't say the sun is gigantic. Well, it can hold 1 million Earths if it were hollow, but Betelgeuse can hold 1 million suns. Okay, so when do you say something big and huge? So I try to, but now we're at the limits, and I get to say this is an awesome number of elephants to fit into a thimble. Okay, so now you go denser than that. This thing collapses into a black hole, and no matter the size of the black hole, it's going to eat anything that comes near it. So Earth would slowly sort of, what would happen if you drop the black hole? Earth and the black hole will drop towards one another. Okay, and Earth will begin to funnel down towards it. And so basically Earth will begin to crumble as it gets ripped apart and it gets stretched, spaghettified. It's the act of spaghettification that occurs because the black hole is small and what it's eating is large. That's what happens in a spaghetti machine. It's a tiny hole in a big blob of dough, and at the end it's a spaghetti stream. So it would not be pleasant. It would probably happen very fast, faster than you can communicate this information to the other side of the world. So just enjoy it as it happens. It's a one-way. We're pretty sure we've got the inventory of black holes figured, that this is not the most likely way to die. But it'd be an awesome way to die. By the way, this ripping apart into a strand, the two things that are happening is ripping you head to toe, Earth head to toe, and the funneling is another interesting feature because the space-time that it occupies is this tiny little narrow funnel, essentially, and that's where you get. That's the concept of spaghettification. And I wrote a book, Death by Black Holes. Oh, that's right. Yes, Death. Vanna White, thank you for showing, displaying. And in there, I describe in detail what would happen if you personally fell into a black hole. And yes, it's a one-way trip, but it's awesome, and it's my choice of death. Like, if I want death row, I said I want to die by a black hole. If I had the choice. But it's much better than getting hit by a bus, right? It's a one-way trip, and you get to do experiments all the way down. Thank you all for your attention. Let's keep it going here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tyson, just phenomenal. This was awesome. Thank you all for being here. We do want to encourage you to talk to your members of Congress, people that you know. We'd love to have their help on the caucus. We'd love to have your help on the caucus as well. This is important, and we've got to tell this story. So thanks for being here. Have a great afternoon. Again, Dr. Tyson, thank you. One more round of applause for Dr. Tyson. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress at loc.gov.
Good idea. The enemy's top tower has fallen.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Librarian of Congress, Dr. James H. Billington.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jim Billington, the Librarian of Congress, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this event that celebrates the life and work of the great and outstanding American scientist and science communicator Carl Sagan. Today, the library is opening to researchers the voluminous Sagan Papers, formerly known as the Seth MacFarlane Collection of the Carl Sagan and Anne Druyan Archive. So on behalf of the library, I want to thank Samson Galaxy for its support of today's celebration, Seth MacFarlane for making it possible for the library to acquire and make accessible the Carl Sagan and Anne Druyan Archive. We thank Anne Druyan especially for her constant support, inspiration, and guidance about the archive. And we thank all the speakers that are with us today. Carl Sagan's special stature and role in the history here enables us to bring together an outstanding group of science and science communicators and educators in a time of great concern about enhancing our national skills in science, technology, engineering, and math. I also finally want to thank Jim Hudson, the chief of the library's manuscript division, and all the dedicated archivists here who worked hard to organize and describe the Carl Sagan and Druyan archive, making it accessible to researchers. In addition to the distinguished members of Congress and staff who have enabled us to amass our wide-ranging scientific collections, we have with us today scientific thinkers from a variety of fields, producers of film and television programs about science, science educators, leaders of scientific organizations, Einstein Fellows, science writers, and students. Science has always been a large part and a crucial part of the library's collection in 470 languages. Papers of innovators like Samuel Morse, Alexander Graham Bell, Wilbur and Orville Wright, J. Robin Oppenheimer, and a host of other American scientists, as well as the earliest published works of Copernicus, Galileo, and other early innovators of modern science, whose works are that are on display here are in your program and will be seen later in the day. So it's exciting that the rich Sagan-Druyan archive, 595,000 items, now joins the great selection and collection of scientific knowledge from various time periods, cultures, and disciplinary subdivisions of science and engineering that are here in the nation's library. We now are aware that the information contained in the Sagan-Druyan archives will be available for the education and inspiration of the next generation of scientific thinkers, representing an ongoing memorial for the absolutely unique science exciter of our time, Carl Sagan. It's now my honor to call Seth MacFarlane, to whom we owe much, to the podium to launch the day's important proceedings. Mr. MacFarlane.
Place is way too classy for me. For some reason that escapes me now, I was watching a rerun of Sequest last week. For those of you, if you don't know what that is, Sequest was a science fiction program back in the 90s about a state-of-the-art submarine whose mission was to explore the uncharted regions of Earth's oceans. It starred Roy Scheider and a cast of actors who I'm sure all bought new cars midway through season 1 before they discovered they were on a terrible show doomed to be canceled.
5 seconds.
The point of this is that one of the crew members was a super smart dolphin named Darwin. And as I was watching the show, trying to decide whether to swallow the whole bottle of sleeping pills now or during the end credits, it occurred to me that if this show were made today, 2 things would be different. One, Roy Scheider's character would have a meth addiction. And 2, the name Darwin would probably be changed to something else. There would be a conversation among network executives that the name Darwin might be too polarizing or too...
10 seconds.
or too politically charged. They wouldn't want to turn off or alienate a significant portion of their audience. Somewhere between the 1990s and today, the acknowledgement of scientific achievement and the embrace thereof ceased in many parts of this country to be a source of pride and became a taboo specter with threatening overtones. Now, while there is absolutely no defensible reason for this to have occurred, we all know how it occurred. Now, science has always been, as we know, exploited and politicized in some form or another. But in the past 10 years or so, it seems like that politicization has been on steroids. Long accepted scientific truths have been brought into question, largely, who are we kidding, by one side of the aisle, solely for the purpose of generating passion that can be reshaped to suit various agendas. And the other side of the aisle has not really put up much of a fight. Instead, they've allowed the situation to fester instead of leading us back to the truth as a leader should. By fearing for political standing instead of fighting for the truth, they have essentially revealed the same fear betrayed by those hypothetical network execs who were nervous about naming a talking fish Darwin. I guess they're mammals, huh? And unfortunately, the press has done little to help repair the damage. They routinely report the noisy ravings of fringe-level anti-science bellowers who would not even have been on Walter Cronkite's radar, let alone press-worthy. As a result, a nationwide scientific regression has taken place. We should be in the midst of an excitement-filled national discussion on the frontiers of science, such as the fascinating concept put forth by quantum physics that the universe may have been conceived by a quantum fluctuation in one of the higher dimensions of the space-time continuum. Instead, we're still trying to get people to understand that, as personally uncomfortable as some may find the fact, we all evolved from Robin Williams. At some point during all this, someone has to stand up and loudly say, all right, enough, cut the crap. First of all, evolution really happened. It's not in debate. Some of the milestones along the way are still being uncovered, but it doesn't mean that a member of Congress should suddenly get to call the whole thing into question. I've never seen gravity questioned or politicized in any way. And in the grand scheme of the universe, we probably understand gravity less than we understand evolution. It just doesn't make people as uncomfortable. So it's a less effective tool of manipulation. Now, there have been many reasons for this cultural shift, and while it may not have tipped the scales, one thing is certain: we took a big, big hit when we lost Carl Sagan. Here was a man of science who was regularly in the public eye. He used to appear on The Johnny Carson Show alongside big stars like Harrison Ford, Bill Cosby, and Jerry Van Dyke. Yeah. And he belonged in the spotlight. He was a great popularizer of science, a man who understood that scientific advancement is something that affects us all on a daily basis, whether we're aware of it or not.
Let's hope that doesn't happen again.
He knew that if there's a walled-off separation between the academic world and the public at large, it doesn't do anyone any good. It was partially thanks to the efforts of Carl that the case of science phobia, from which we suffer today, had a much harder time proliferating in the decades prior. He translated for those of us who don't even remember how to use a protractor. He not only found creative ways of explaining dense scientific concepts to us without ever appearing condescending or superior, but he did so with such an obvious passion, enthusiasm, and love for the subject matter that it was impossible not to want to go along for the ride. With Carl, it wasn't, we evolved from microscopic organisms, that's scary and unsettling. Instead, it was, we evolved from these incredible, fascinating, totally alien-seeming creatures. Isn't that amazing? You want to know more? Yeah, so do I. Let's try and learn the answer to the mystery together. Which is another thing I always admired about Carl. He tended to speak less in terms of us as a country and more in terms of us as a species. He was truly a man who thought ahead of his time and honestly ahead of our time as well. Now, I never had the chance to meet Carl, which I greatly regret, but I've been lucky enough to befriend and later work alongside his wife, Andrian, whose blinding brilliance, unbounded imagination, and incredible strength of character have made me feel as though I know them both. She's one of those people whose brain is so formidable and so constantly bursting with new ideas that I'll tell you, if I were that smart, I would have to smoke pot too. Sorry. I mean, we're what, like 6 months away from legalization? It's fine. The work that Anne has done on the new Cosmos series is, I can tell you now, everything we all hoped it would be and more. And the series is, of course, hosted by the brilliant and charismatic Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who has emerged as the heir apparent to Carl's rare combination of wisdom and communicative power. Anne continues the work that she and Carl began together in full force. And it is not only my privilege to know her, but I am a better man by the association. So let me say I am thrilled and humbled to be connected in some tiny microscopic way to the extraordinary life's work of Carl Sagan, a man who opened my eyes and the eyes of millions of others to the ever-expanding wonders and mysteries of science. Thank you.
Please welcome to the podium Dr. Christopher F. Chiba with his message of science and hope.
Good morning. Even after all these years since Carl Sagan's death, it is a melancholy honor for me to have been asked by Andrian to be here this morning to say a few words about Carl and about the world we live in. But I am thankful to be asked. I miss Carl greatly, and I think our country misses him more than it knows. In his 1995 book, The Demon-Haunted World, in a chapter titled Science and Hope, Carl wrote, "We've arranged a global civilization in which most crucial elements profoundly depend on science and technology. We have also arranged things so that almost no one understands science and technology. This is a prescription for disaster. We might get away with it for a while, but sooner or later this combustible mixture of ignorance and power is going to blow up in our faces." I want to talk briefly this morning about this problem, and I want to make the case that as worrying as the problem Carl identified is, there is a reverse problem that might be just as dangerous. As an example, to make this concrete, let me recall an experience of about a decade ago. Over the span of a couple of weeks, I gave what was supposed to be the same policy-oriented academic talk in two different venues. The first was in Washington, D.C., at a leading foreign policy think tank. The second was in California, at a leading biotechnology company. The subject of the talk was the challenge posed to international security and to all of our securities by rapid advances in biotechnology. In particular, I was concerned, I still am concerned, about the opportunities that the exponential increase in the power of biotechnology could confer on small groups of bad actors to undertake potentially extremely dangerous manipulations of microorganisms. These capabilities are literally exponentiating at a Moore's Law-type pace, as measured by various metrics across time. Most Cold War-style arms control approaches seemed, and still seem, inadequate to the challenges posed by this new world. The DC think tank was populated, as DC think tanks will be, by the recently out of power and the hoping soon to be back in power. Policymakers, or those who might soon once again make policy. Among them, there were a few people who were quite knowledgeable about biology and biotechnology, but not most. I could assume that pretty much everyone present knew the Biological Weapons Convention, the multilateral treaty that endeavors to prevent the development of biological weapons. Most would know the story of the failed decade-long effort to negotiate a compliance protocol to the convention, but most would not know a great deal about molecular biology or biotechnology. At the biotechnology company in California, the reverse situation existed. This time, I asked, to a crowded auditorium of scientists and technicians, not which of them could identify, say, the polymerase chain reaction. All of them understood it much better than I did, of course. But rather, how many of them were familiar with the Biological Weapons Convention. Several hands went up, including that of one of the company's executives. It could have been worse. But only several hands in the full auditorium were raised. So among these scientists who were devoting their careers to the useful employment of biotechnology, nearly no one was familiar with the international treaty intended, however inadequately, to prevent harm from that technology. A decade later, at Princeton University, I had a similar experience, but one with a gratifying outcome. A senior biologist and I were talking at an outdoor barbecue with our kids. He lamented how little biology policymakers in Washington seemed to know. I agreed with him, but then noted that my experience was that the problem also ran in the opposite direction, that most biologists did not know much about, say, the Biological Weapons Convention. My colleague admitted that he was in that group, and then he did a terrific thing. He decided on the spot to change this, and henceforth to include a lecture on biology and bioterrorism as a component of Princeton's big undergraduate biology course. So the reverse side of Carl's concern is that there is too often a lack of knowledge by scientists of policy and policymaking. There are some areas of science where the policy issues are at the cutting edge of scientific research and are embraced by the relevant communities. I think climate change is an example of this. But there are many other areas where the relevant scientific community is not strongly enough engaged, or sees only potential restrictions on its freedom from government action, or even punishes those who stray too far into policy. Young scientists get the message by watching the behavior of their elders, and the message too often is, the world may be haunted by demons, but they can wait until you have tenure. I think that scientists, universities, and scientific bodies are all getting better at this, but they need to get a lot better. Carl's career displayed one model. After some very early experience with formal government advising, he became increasingly involved in policy, but from a base outside the usual advisory committee structure. He had the stature to speak to principals directly. He also had the stature to involve himself directly with his Soviet colleagues in so-called Track 2 diplomacy. There's an evocative picture of which I'm quite fond in Richard Rhodes's book Arsenals of Folly, titled The Scientist's Back Channel. The picture shows Carl Sagan and Anne Druyan together with Dick Garland over dinner with a Soviet colleague. I remember a diplomat formerly at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow saying to me that Carl could irritate people at the embassy. He sure could irritate people at the embassy. But that he was respected there nonetheless because they recognized, as the diplomat put it to me, that Carl was nobody's fool. He would stand up to his Soviet colleagues or the Soviet government in the same way that he would stand up to his own government. For most scientists, though, the same opportunities won't be present at that level. Most of us will not have the individual stature to insert ourselves at a point of our own choosing into domestic policy making or international diplomacy. There need to be models for the rest of us. And for many, that will mean service on government committees or on scientific society committees or within the government itself. My concern here is not with scientists serving the scientific community, as important as that service is, but with scientists serving, if you will, the policy community. We need scientists operating at every point along the policy advising spectrum. Now, Carl was a great optimist, and I want to close optimistically. Every year, there is a flood of young scientists who apply for the policy fellowships offered by our country's scientific societies. Anyone who is familiar with Capitol Hill or with the executive branch knows the role that these fellows play. So the dedication to service is already there. We just need to work to ensure that our universities and professional societies, but especially our universities, welcome that dedication. Surely we can do that. As Carl urged in The Demon-Haunted World, let's teach both science and hope. Thank you.
Please welcome to the podium Dr. Ralph J. Cicerone with the message, "From the faint early sun paradox to the bright star of science communication."
First, on behalf of everybody here today, I want to thank the Library of Congress, Seth MacFarlane, and Ann Drian for bringing us together today in a very enthusiastic occasion. I want to talk very briefly about what I saw as some of the passions and intellectual pursuits of Carl Sagan. I think all of us know that he was very interested in the universe, its size, its characteristics, what's in it. But I want to talk about a couple of other ones, his lifelong interest in life on Earth and on other planets. I'll call it the habitability of the Earth. And then finally, his enormous enthusiasm for learning and teaching of all kinds, which we kind of summarized by saying science communication, but it was really a fascination and a commitment to learning and teaching, I think. First of all, on Earth habitability. In 1972, Carl published a paper which is still regarded as a major landmark. In fact, last week I found an enormously scholarly paper carrying on in great detail and in progressively finer detail an important idea that Carl had. It was the following. We've learned a lot about how stars behave, and they evolve with time over billions of years. And in the case of our own sun and the class of stars that it belongs to, there's very solid evidence that the sun used to be dimmer, say 3 or 4 billion years ago. Perhaps 30% less light and energy was coming out of the sun. That's fact number one. Fact number two is you can then do a simple physics calculation, which had been done well by that time. How warm would the Earth have been in those days? What would the temperature be? And the answer comes out it would be frozen solid. But there's also geological evidence that that's never been the case in the history of the Earth, so something's missing. Something is either wrong or missing. And Carl and his colleague Mullen had the idea that there might have been an early greenhouse effect in the atmosphere of the Earth. And Carl was particularly interested in ammonia as a gas, because there was reason to believe in those days and now that ammonia was important in the origin of life on Earth as a base for amino acids. So they did calculations on just putting a little bit of ammonia into the primitive atmosphere, and sure enough, they could raise the calculated temperature of Earth above freezing. And this was a major contribution. Today, the topic is more complicated. We think we'd need a little bit of methane and carbon dioxide as well, but it was an important contribution, all driven by what is it that makes this planet habitable and how has it changed? The second topic is not so cheery, and that was the nuclear winter. Many of you know that Carl was very involved in the early 80s in trying to calculate and figure out what would happen in a fairly large nuclear exchange of weapons between, for example, the two superpowers. And there had already been some findings that a lot of dust and smoke would be lofted into the air, largely from fires in cities, such as happened in the firebombing of Europe in the Second World War. But what no one had thought of yet is that dimming of the sun. What would its effects be on the Earth's climate? And there was a major paper that was published by Carl and his colleagues, referred to as TTAPS, because it was Turco, Toon Ackerman, Jim Pollack, and Carl Sagan in that order. And I was a reviewer of that paper, and it was quite stunning. And I remember writing "publish without delay" in my final comments. What they had figured out was that this smoke would be lofted by the buoyancy of the heat to very high altitudes and could actually block out sunlight for a period of months, certainly a growing season, maybe longer. Not only would it cut off food supplies, but it would cool the entire Earth and launch what people referred to then as a nuclear winter. Well, the science was good, but Carl carried it into the public domain. He wrote op-eds for magazines, newspapers, the journal Foreign Affairs, Nature magazine, Science. I don't know how many times he talked on Johnny Carson's show about it. But the point was that even the winners in a nuclear war would lose, because at least a hemisphere of the planet, if not half the planet or more, could be harmed in this way climatically. So this is a cover of a book that he wrote with my friend Rich Turco, which never made the bestseller list, but it gives an enormously detailed and important documentary of the thinking they had gone through. As you see, a path where no man thought was quite stunning. And it was, I think, a major contribution. The question is still not settled. Fortunately, we haven't had to confront the actual experiment. Finally, let me say a word about his teaching and learning. As people know here very, very well, he was an enthusiastic communicator, just all over the world. He enjoyed it, he knew he was good at it, and he felt a responsibility. A personal experience I'll share from 1970, I think it was the first time I met Carl, and we were off on an afternoon walk after a formal presentation, and he told me a trick that he had discovered. He was doing a lot of traveling even then, and he would go into hotels where he was lodging and try to speak with the general manager or whoever was in charge and convince that person that if they would give him free room and board, he would speak in the lobby of the hotel. And he was so good at it that he engaged all kinds of people, and the managers, when word of mouth spread, they did it for him quite a bit. So that was great. Of course, the magnificent achievement of the Cosmos series, which we're going to hear a little bit more about. Seth MacFarlane just mentioned that there's going to be a new Cosmos series. Leads me to thank him for all that he did and the great parade that he's created now with wonderfully competent and original and innovative people who are carrying it on. Some of the people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Seth himself and Janet and Jerry Zucker, who are here today, people who are really carrying this on because they believe some of the quotes that Chris Chiba just read about what Carl believed is the enormous challenge that we have in the world we live in, and yet how much better it can be. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a pleasure.
Please welcome to the podium Dr. John P. Holdren with his message of creating a science-savvy citizenry.
Well, first let me convey my thanks and those of President Obama to Ann and Seth, Dr. Billington, and others here at the Library of Congress for making this event possible. It's really great to see such an extraordinary array of luminaries here to celebrate the exceptional scientist, educator, communicator, guide to the cosmos, and inspiration who was Carl Sagan. While the President couldn't make it today, I can tell you that he is committed to the same goals in science, the education of kids and the public about science, and the exploration of the cosmos that Carl so effectively espoused. Committed, that is, to ensuring that these great endeavors get the federal and societal support that their importance to the human enterprise warrants. Supporting President Obama in that commitment comes naturally to me, I'm happy to say. My interest in and passion for science and for space goes back a long way, and was boosted along the way by a number of interactions, first with Carl's work and then with the man himself. In grammar school in the 1950s, I was reading about Robert Goddard and making solid rockets using drugstore chemicals and my mother's discarded lipstick tubes. At MIT in the 1960s, I majored in aeronautics and astronautics and co-led that major's senior class project of designing a manned Mars mission. And in graduate school at Stanford in the late 1960s, my interest in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence was sparked by Carl's remarkable 1966 book with Joseph Shklovsky, Intelligent Life in the Universe. I first met Carl in 1972 when I was at Caltech working with the late great geochemist and scientific statesman Harrison Brown. Carl was there to give some lectures, and the Browns had a dinner at their apartment for Carl and his then wife, me and my wife, and the chair of the Caltech Geology and Geophysics Department, Barclay Cam, and his wife. What I remember most about that dinner was Carl talking animatedly about the work he was doing to develop the images, sounds, and symbols about human beings and our Earth to be inscribed on gold-plated copper discs that would be carried into interstellar space on the Voyager 1 and 2 missions. Carl, Frank Drake, Ann Druyan, and others later produced a book called Murmurs of the Earth about those messages, made in the hope that one of the Voyagers would someday reach another civilization. Carl and I met on many occasions after that evening in Pasadena. On every such occasion, I learned from him. He was a first-class scientist with a wide-ranging intellect and also an extraordinary gift and passion, as we all know, for communicating the content and the excitement of science to people of all backgrounds and ages. I want to use the rest of my few minutes here this morning to talk about how and why the kind of communication and inspiration that Carl was so good at providing is so important to advancing the Obama administration's priorities around science, space exploration, and science, technology, engineering, and math education today. The President has often said that the single most important thing we can do for the future of our country is to lift our game in STEM education. And he knows that there are three aims that are served by doing that. One is to educate and train the next generation of discoverers, inventors, and innovators, the winners of Nobel Prizes and National Medals of Science and of Technology and Innovation, the founders of new high-tech industries, the next Harold Varmus and Gordon Moore, and maybe, if we're lucky, the next Carl Sagan. A second aim is to ensure that we have the technologically capable workforce that the jobs of the 21st century increasingly require. And the third is to produce the science-savvy citizenry that a well-functioning democracy requires in an era when more and more of the consequential issues before our elected officials have significant science and technology content. That third aim sometimes gets less attention than the other two, but it's arguably the most important of the three, not least because only with support from a science-savvy citizenry will society make the investments that achieving the first two aims will require. Investments in STEM education, in basic research and the research universities that do most of it, in public-private community college partnerships for workforce training, and in scientific infrastructure, including high-speed computing, Earth-observing satellites, and space telescopes. Carl, of course, knew all this. He knew that for these reasons and more, a science-savvy citizenry is essential for contemporary society's success, sustainability, and perhaps even survival. He understood that prosperity and public health would ultimately be at risk in a society half of whose members denied the fact of biological evolution. He knew that the degree of collective action needed to avoid unmanageably disruptive global climate change resulting from human activities would not materialize if too few elected officials understood its reality and its impacts. He would have loved President Obama's comment in rolling out his climate action plan last June that, quote, "We don't have time for a meeting of the Flat Earth Society." And Carl knew that the political will to shrink nuclear arsenals and abjure their use would materialize only if a majority of citizens came to understand what science tells us about the consequences of a nuclear war. As we here all know and have gathered to celebrate, Carl Sagan acted on his understanding of the need for a science-savvy citizenry, and he did so with unparalleled style and effectiveness. He was a tireless, impassioned explainer, teacher, and mentor, infused with and relentlessly propagating excitement about the Earth, the cosmos, and human possibilities. I only wish he were still with us. I can almost hear him now, explaining to a captivated global audience of all ages that thanks to the Kepler project, we now know that there are not only billions and billions of stars in our galaxy, but also, in all likelihood, billions and billions of Earth-like planets. Thank you very much.
Please welcome to the podium Dr. Jonathan I. Lenine with his message of Letter from a Hero.
This is the first edition of The Cosmic Connection by Carl Sagan, and I bought this book in 1973 at the age of 14, having read about it in Sky and Telescope. And I read this book, of course. I read it very quickly, and I was transformed by it. I thought I knew about astronomy as a 14-year-old nerd. I didn't. Carl showed me what astronomy and what humanity's place in the universe really was. And I was so excited by this book that I would run around the house and read excerpts of all 39 chapters to members of my family. My mother stopped this insurrection by saying to me, "Why don't you just write to him?" I said, "Write to who?" "Carl Sagan." I said, "He's not going to read a letter from me. I'm just some 14-year-old nerd." My first date, was in a polyester suit, and the date ended really early, too. So she said, "Write to him." So I did. And it was agonizing to try to put this together on lined yellow paper. Well, a few weeks later, I got this, which was a letter and reprints from Carl Sagan. So the letter, which I actually have here, looks like this. It's 2 pages. Personally written by Carl Sagan. And Carl got right down to business because I asked him, "How do you become an astronomer?" And Carl said to me, and I'll read it from here because this monitor doesn't work. He talked about astronomy as in fundamental sense and application of mathematics and physics. In graduate school at Cornell, we often accept students who have excellent undergraduate backgrounds in mathematics and physics, but have never taken a single course in astronomy in their lives. I didn't know that, so the key was to focus on physics. Carl provided that information. He then went on the next page, to say, "I think your dedication to astronomy is admirable and should be encouraged." And of course, I read this about 30,000 times to myself. So I realized at this point that I really could become an astronomer. Now, that being said, and having been interested in astronomy from my youth, I actually lost courage. In the mid-1970s, the economy was terrible. PhDs in physics were driving taxi cabs. And so I decided that I should be instead a medical doctor. And I wrote to Carl Sagan. So Carl, in his understated way, steered me gently back to astronomy by saying, "On your career plans, medicine is a quite respectable profession, and note that there are important opportunities in medical research which carry some of the frontier excitement of astronomy." So that brought me back to astronomy after a while. Now, years went by, I went into graduate school and so forth, and unbeknownst to me, in the mid-'80s, my mother wrote a letter to Carl Sagan, wanting to make sure that he knew that I actually went through graduate school, got my PhD, and I was working. And so Carl wrote this letter back to my mother. Did he have time for this? So, first of all, he said how much he appreciated the letter. He then said that the accumulation of his mail has reached such a state that he's not answering as many letters from younger versions of Jonathan Lenine as he should. And he says the letter reminds him of the importance of finding ways to write to youngsters. And then he makes this undeserving compliment at the end, which is to say, if I've helped inspire Jonathan and taught him something about planetary science, he has certainly returned the favor. Now, I'm not putting this up here to brag, because I have a point to make about this. First of all, Carl's letters have the clarity and eloquence that his books do as well. He was He had an amazing dynamic range in his ability to write. He could soar lyrically in his books and his TV interviews, and then he could write clearly and eloquently to a 14-year-old about what to do in order to become an astronomer. His letter to me was not remote, it was not condescending, it was collegial in an honest way, and it was remarkable for that reason. And he didn't enclose a picture of himself in that letter. He enclosed 2 reprints of articles about Phobos and Deimos from the Mariner 9 mission. So, he knew a nerd when he saw one. But I gobbled up those letters as well. And the letter to my mother, I think, is even more remarkable because it really begins with almost a kind of lamentation. I found out years later how many of my colleagues he wrote to when they wrote to him as younger people. And Anne said that he had stacks of these. And he just, being a human being, he couldn't do an infinite number of these letters. And he lamented that fact because he knew how important it was. And then in the last part, he says something that, in effect, is what Francis of Assisi said. It's in giving that we receive, but for an important reason. If humanity is to save itself from itself, it has to grow to become aware of its real connection to the cosmos, its scientific connection to the cosmos, and its fragility as a planet-bound species. And of course, Carl knew this. We all know that Carl knew this. But he also knew that the consciousness of this fact was not growing, and it was shining only dimly in the society of his time and, of course, of today. And so nurturing the next generation to be conscious of our place in the cosmos was his most important responsibility and the most important contribution he gave to humankind. And he knew that, and part of that was nurturing young scientists to become the Carl Sagans of the next generation, like Neil deGrasse Tyson. So he nurtured people by writing these letters, and he ensured that there would be scientists coming up in the future who would do what he had done. So Joseph Campbell said that a hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself, and this exemplifies Carl perfectly. He was a hero. He gave everything to the public, to his colleagues, to his students, and to students yet to come. So for that reason, I am really, really glad that Anne Druyan, his creative partner in so many of his beautiful books, has been working with Steve Soter, with Neil deGrasse Tyson, with Seth MacFarlane, to make Cosmos 2 a reality. Maybe that will allow us to push the reset button on this and give all of us a chance to make this truly a science savvy and science knowledgeable species. Thank you very much.
And now a brief film clip.
Run and gun!
Carl contributed enormously to our knowledge of the planets. He correctly predicted the existence of methane lakes on Saturn's giant moon Titan. He showed that the atmosphere of the early Earth must have contained powerful greenhouse gases. He was the first to understand that seasonal changes on Mars were due to wind-blown dust. Carl was a pioneer in the search for extraterrestrial life and intelligence. He played a leading role in every major spacecraft mission to explore the solar system during the first 40 years of the space age.
Please welcome to the podium Dr. David Morrison with his message of Carl Sagan, the People's Astronomer.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here to honor Carl. I was one of his first graduate students, and he mentored me through my whole career. So it's great to have this brief opportunity to thank him and to thank you. Carl was born at the ideal time. He was a person for his time because he was there to be our guide through the initial exploration of our solar system. As he said and wrote many times, there's only one generation that could begin when the planets and their moons were simply faint points of light and could watch each of them emerge as a true place with its own geology and perhaps biology as well. We sometimes forget what an excellent scientist Carl was. He published more than 300 peer-reviewed papers. He was the mentor to a large number of graduate students, some of whom are on this program. And he brought together fields as diverse as astronomy, planetary science, including geology, and biology. It was really quite remarkable for an astronomer to be interested in biology as well. In fact, it was remarkable to be a planetary scientist when he began. Most astronomers considered planetary science very nearly beyond the pale, and biology, oh my, that wasn't legitimate at all. But he brought all of these ideas together in a unique way. He was the right person at the right time. He also, as we have noted, was a wonderful teacher. And I've seen him many times speaking to public audiences as well as classes, always willing to answer questions to the best of his ability. Sometimes it gets sort of amusing. Once he was giving a talk out in California, I'd introduced him, it was a good talk, and in the end, one member of the audience got up and asked a question whose obvious answer was billions and billions. And of course, Carl said he'd never used that phrase. So they went back and forth, and Carl did not answer billions and billions. And the person kept repeating the question. And finally, Carl held his finger and said, "I know what you want me to say, and I'm not going to say it." Another aspect of Carl that is so different, but is ultimately founded on his scientific expertise, was his interest in social and political problems, and his contributions to world peace, some of which were successful, some not. He really seriously hoped that there could be a joint US and Soviet human mission to Mars, not only as a way to advance science, but also as a way to bring the two superpowers together. I remember once sitting in a scientific meeting at the Space Research Institute in Moscow, and suddenly here comes Carl Sagan and Robert Redford walking past. They waved and went on doing their thing. He was an international figure by then. We had a meeting of the Galileo science team during a period in the doldrums after the Challenger accident when NASA was unable to launch the mission. So we met once a year, kind of waiting and doing some science in the meantime, and he came to one of these meetings. He didn't usually. It was great to have him there. He was wonderful at responding and talking about the science, and so at the end of the meeting, we went around and asked everyone what they planned to do during the next year to contribute to the science. And we came to Carl, and he thanked us. He said it was really great to be there. He really enjoyed interacting, but frankly, he would not be able to do much work on the Galileo mission during the next year because he was very much occupied with saving the world from nuclear war. It was a short pause, and then we all agreed, yes, that was okay. One of the things, of course, that occupied him so much late in his life in particular, was the struggle against pseudoscience. Such a difficult task, one that he was uniquely able to do because he had the scientific stature. He was known as a teacher, and he could address these problems that others here have spoken of also. I think his book, The Demon Haunted World, is his greatest contribution. And I want to quote one thing from it. There's so many quotable things from Carl. But he said that finding the occasional straw of truth awash in a great ocean of confusion and bamboozle requires vigilance, dedication, and courage. But if we don't practice these tough habits of thought, we risk becoming a nation of suckers, up for grabs by the next charlatan who saunters along. Obviously, a message very much applicable today, and maybe especially appropriate to be given here in Washington. Things really have gotten bad in many ways, and we all know that. It's not just the charlatans, it's the people who are trying to pursue political ends and distort science in order to make that possible. I think sometimes, what would Carl be doing if he were still here today? Would he be able to be any better at fighting against the tide of ignorance and superstition than the rest of us? I'm not sure. We have fine people like Neil Tyson who are wonderful spokespersons for science, but they tend to get drowned out just by the sheer volume of lousy material. Carl could be on television when there were only 3 channels, and so you had a 1/3 chance that you would see him. Now there are hundreds of channels, and any individual can easily be drowned out. I do want to comment, though, at the end on the tremendous optimism that Carl had, not just about our ability to think rationally about a broad range of things, but that science was going to go places. I had the honor of doing an update, a chapter in the reissue of The Cosmic Connection, which John Lunin just talked about, and compared what Carl was writing with reality as it seems now 30 years later. And I was struck by how optimistic he was. He believed that by now we would have human colonies on Mars and the moon. He believed that we would be sending spacecraft to the outer solar system every year. He believed SETI would have succeeded, and we would be in contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. He had a vision that was wonderful to read about. I can see how John Lunin was so inspired by Cosmic Connection. And we still have great visions, but they're not quite the same. And I ask myself sometime, if Carl had lived, would he have been able to make a bigger difference in carrying us forward in science and in public discourse, something that we all need so badly? If I have 1 minute, I'm going to show my own slideshow. It sort of pales by comparison with what you just saw. But these are my personal slides of Carl. In chronological order, starting back in his days at Harvard. There was a very short period in time at Cornell in '69 when he wore a mustache. Here he is with Gerard B. Kuiper, his thesis advisor, and also he's back to us, Steve Soder, who will be talking in a few minutes. Many of you may know that he started his campaign against pseudoscience quite early, and in 1974 he sponsored a meeting of at the American Association for Advancement of Science with Emmanuel Velikovsky, the pseudo-technologist. Here he is in '74 with some of his students, and with Jim Pollack, his longtime collaborator. Together they did so much of the profound science on the atmosphere of Venus and on windblown dust on Mars. This is with Hans Mark, the director of NASA Ames Research Center, at the dedication of the Kuiper Airborne Observatory. This is Viking. I was standing under the monitor while these folks were seeing the very first pictures from the surface of Mars and looking up at that monitor. In the Voyager era with Ed Stone, the chief scientist, a picture with me at the same time as Voyager. That is me, by the way. And this one I like. Now, if any of you don't know, this is what scientists really do when they get a scientific insight. Another view, Carl, of course, attended a lot of scientific meetings, and it was always wonderful to have him there. At a birthday, we're now getting up into more recent times. This is the last picture I took of Carl with his longtime colleague Frank Drake in 1994. I miss him. I loved him. I wish he were still here. But it's so nice to have this symposium to remember him. Thank you.
Please welcome to the podium Dr. Bill Nye with his message of Carl Sagan saved the world, and me along with it.
Good morning. It really is an honor to address you all. Through an old but serviceable telescope from our front yard, right here in Northwest Washington, my father showed me the moon and the planet Saturn for the first time, and I shall never forget it. Seeing those objects up close changes you, and so it was with Professor Sagan's astronomy class. It changed me every bit as profoundly as the craters on the moon or the rings of Saturn. He empowered us. Indeed, he emboldened us to come to know our place in the cosmos, our place among the stars, what I like to call our place in space. Every day in his class, there was something astonishing to behold. He showed us pictures from Mars that no one outside of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory had seen before. He challenged us to figure out just what you'd have to do to really find life on another world. Along with that, he demanded to know what record best suited to inclusion on the Voyager spacecraft. And we strongly suggested Johnny Be Good. It was in his class that I became aware for the first time of the Tunguska airburst event, the remarkable, terrible, destructive power of an impacting asteroid or meteoroid. It's an issue that our leaders today are just beginning to understand. They're just beginning to see that it's a small step from impactor science fiction to impactor science fact. Now here's hoping we can imagine the consequences and just not let an impact happen. I wrote a paper for Professor Sagan about the paranormal illusion called Kirlian photography. Pictures of imaginary life-oriented, or auras, halos. In other words, although it was a class about astronomy, my final paper was about pseudoscience, a topic seemingly unrelated to the stars. But Carl Sagan wanted me, to know and appreciate the process of science much more than the facts of astronomy. He made me a skeptic. He made me a critical thinker. He changed me. It was Carl Sagan who introduced the phrase comparative climatology to us and to the world. And when we made these comparisons in his class, we came to behold that our Earth is not just a special case, but is astonishingly special. Carl Sagan's insights showed the world that the greenhouse effect is a terribly important thing to understand. After having spent a great deal of time with the notion of comparative climatology over the last 33 years, I can remind anyone that virtually every mathematical climate model that we have today can trace its beginnings to Carl's work on nuclear winter. His first set of assumptions, his first set of insights as to what's important in such a model are still with us today. It really is remarkable. As an educator, an engineer, a citizen of the Earth, I hope that we soon stop denying and start doing all we can to slow climate change and mitigate the consequences of our soon-to-be displaced populations. I came of age as an engineer in a world that featured the Ford Pinto. An older reference lost on many of the younger listeners. The Chevy Vega, leisure suits, the removal of a perfectly functioning solar hot water system from the White House roof, and the decision to launch the Challenger space shuttle on a particularly cold day. I was troubled by my country's willingness to embrace the mediocre. I often felt Professor Sagan was troubled by this trend as well. And by the time of my 10th college reunion, I was fired up to do a television show for children about science because of what I had viewed as the short-sightedness in, well, in everything. In government and in industry, I wanted to influence kids so that we might have a more scientifically literate society for a better tomorrow for all of us. It took a letter and several phone calls to arrange a meeting with my old professor, who probably had no idea what an unremarkable former student would want from him. But he agreed to meet with me, and by all accounts, he took the time to meet with almost anyone who made a good case for it. In those 5 minutes, he once again changed my life forever. In short, he said that he could see that I loved engineering, the business of using science to make things and solve problems, but he encouraged me to focus my educational work on pure science. He said, and I shall never forget it, he said, "Kids resonate to pure science." That sentence redirected me. It led directly to what became the popular Bill Nye the Science Guy show. And it's quite a thing for someone to utter just one thought and change a man's life. I will be forever grateful. Professor Sagan told me in so many words, mine was a good and worthy pursuit. Kids resonate to pure science. With the tremendous, almost incredible success of both the Viking missions to Mars and the Voyager missions to our neighboring worlds, Carl and his colleagues became very, very concerned that government support for robotic missions of this sort was drying up at the very moment in history when we should be investing more and pressing farther and deeper into space. So he and Bruce Murray, who was the head of the Jet Propulsion Lab at the time, and Lou Friedman, a Jet Propulsion Lab employee, formed the Planetary Society. It quickly became and still is the world's largest non-governmental space interest organization. And they formed this at what they thought was a crossroads in the history of the exploration of space, and I suggest we are at another crossroads that's very, very similar. So as a former student, I guess, I was put on the mailing list. I joined and became a member. Then 3 years ago, something happened. I left the room or something, and I came back, and now I'm the CEO. Now, the Planetary Society is growing for the first time in many years, and we're going to at last fly 2 solar sail missions. Solar sail missions were something near and dear to Carl's heart. So I can say that as an engineer, as a professional, and as a citizen, Carl Sagan's legacy is part of me. Now, looking around and being part of this event today makes me wonder that perhaps Carl Sagan's life's work is just now bearing new fruit. He inspired enough of the Earth's citizens to take our place in space seriously, to know and appreciate the fragility of our world, that we have so far avoided a nuclear weapon war, that we started thinking about the climate of Mars and especially the climate of Venus as compared with the climate of Earth, that his landmark television series is being updated and broadcast to new generations. There are more science websites today than ever in history. More science interest than in the last 30 years. Perhaps this new fruit will help us, dare I say it, change the world. Perhaps we've begun a new enlightened era of scientific discovery, and that will soon include people everywhere. Although it has taken decades, Carl Sagan may yet save the world as we know it. With his class, his advice, his science, his Planetary Society, he utterly changed my life. And I am so very grateful. Professor Sagan helped me come to know that we all are part of a greater whole. The greater whole, the greatest whole that seems to be, the cosmos. You changed the world, Carl Sagan. Thank you. And thank you from all of us here on Earth. Let's go forward, and dare I say it, change the world in his name. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Please welcome to the podium Dr. Carolyn Porco with her message, Carl, this one's for you.
Good morning, everybody. Or good afternoon. No, it's still morning. And thank you very much for having me here. I'm very glad to be here, and you will soon see why. I met Carl also back in 1972 when I was an undergraduate, but came to know him best when we were fellow members of the imaging team on the Voyager mission, which toured the outer solar system during the 1980s. And I have to tell you, those were incredibly thrilling times. For a young person on her first professional assignment to be there in this historic exploration of the outer solar system, and to watch Carl and all the senior imaging team members try to tease out what it was we were seeing for the first time in history on the worlds and among the rings and so on in orbit around Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And it was also quite challenging. I was, after all, the youngest person on the team. And many times during those years, I found myself the recipient of Carl's